everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Oner podcast, the podcast where we break down and review movies all in one big, long, unbroken take. I'm Austin Archer, and with me, as always, is my childhood next-door neighbor and lifelong best friend,
Cramer, England.
Okay, man, we're doing a retrospective on an old film. Well, not an old film, but like a like a 20-year-old movie.
Yeah.
And what a stinker this movie is, right?
So
like,
bad.
What a piece of crap.
Oh man, nobody likes it.
No. Are you watching closely?
I was gonna ask you that question.
Were you gonna ask me that?
Yes, I was gonna say, Austin, are you watching closely?
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna say this for our viewers too, because pay attention. Are you watching closely to this episode of the show?
Yes.
Okay, because I want to see if you spot. So you gotta be paying attention. All right, there's gonna be abracadabra coming right at you.
This is gonna be a breakdown.
Yeah,
we're gonna reveal all the tricks.
Yeah, this is Christopher Nolan's The Prestige. One of my favorite films of maybe all time. One of my favorite Nolans for sure. I think one of the most underrated and most forgotten films in the Nolan catalog. And right off the bat, everybody should know, if you've never seen this movie, don't watch this episode of our show.
Spoilers. And we're gonna spoil it early.
Yeah, and
we're
this is
spoil it early.
And this is a movie that, like, don't let a YouTube video spoil this movie for you.
Like, experience it for yourself.
Yeah.
So like this movie, there's a few things about this movie. First of all, so Christopher Nolan made he made Batman Begins.
Mm-hmm.
Then he made The Prestige.
Mm-hmm.
Then he made The Dark Knight. Then he made Inception. 4 movies that are like some of the best movies ever.
What a run.
So yeah.
But also, like, Memento comes before.
Yeah, it was Memento, and then
Insomnia.
Insomnia, and then Batman Begins.
And maybe you could say Insomnia is a dip, but Insomnia is not bad.
Really? Yeah, it's a really good movie.
Yeah.
It's it was more like, okay, I've got to make something to prove that I can make a good movie.
Yeah.
And he did. It was almost like Warner Brothers was like, all right, make this, or someone was like, okay, make this movie for us. And it was a great experience and it did well. And then they were like, okay, you could make Batman. And then he got pretty much all the control in the world from there.
I'd say if he went Memento, Batman, Prestige, Dark Knight, Inception, that would be like 5 in a row, just like
yeah,
like
nearly perfect movies.
Yeah. Because I recently rewatched Memento as well, and I just was like, this movie's just so well structured. It's just so technically good. It's just
it's crazy. So I literally just watched this movie. So I watched it on Friday night, and I was like, oh my gosh, I got to write everything down. So I wrote everything down. And then tonight I got home from work, I hurried and ate dinner, and I took my 2 sons downstairs, and we watched it literally right before this recording.
Yeah.
And I was just like watching the whole time, and my sons were like, oh, what about this? What about that? And I was like, well, just hold on. Just like, I was trying to keep because structurally this movie is out of order. It's very structurally sound, but it's out of order.
Very normal for Christopher Nolan.
He loves that.
Yeah.
And it makes sense for this movie.
Yeah.
But like, I kept telling him, like, okay, this is the middle of the movie. Okay, this is jumping to the end. Okay, it's jumping back. Like, to try and keep him a little bit on track. But like, once the reveal happened, my son's jaws dropped. They were just like, and I was like watching them, and I was like, the song came on. I was like, do you guys believe that? They're like, what just happened? And they were like so excited. And I was talking to him, and I was like, he's a twin the whole time. He's a twin. And it was like, it was crazy. And I was telling him all these things. They're like, oh my gosh, I missed it. And it was awesome. It was amazing.
I had a very similar experience. I got to watch this with my girlfriend, who's never seen the movie. She's never seen it before. And I was so excited when I asked her. I said, hey, have you ever seen The Prestige by Christopher Nolan? She said, no. And I said, do you know anything about it? And she goes, no. And I said, will you watch it with me? Because I just want to see. I want to see if you pick it up, like if you and she was like, sure. So she was watching it, and there were several parts in the movie that I paused and I went, do you have any guesses? And she went, she goes, I don't have a clue. And I paused at like moments where it was like if you know the reveal of this
Yeah.
film,
Yeah.
it's crazy how much he's playing in your face the
Oh my god.
entire movie.
The
That he
whole movie.
the
It's
whole
within 5
movie.
minutes,
Yeah,
you can see within 5 minutes, it's probably within 4 or 3 minutes. You can see he's telling you the twist.
yeah,
Not telling, he shows you the twist.
yeah, yeah.
It's like
It's
almost immediate.
more so than so, like, this is why I say this is maybe one of the most underrated Nolan films and
Yeah.
under talked about Nolan films is when
Yeah.
people talk about the greatest twist endings of all time, whenever I watch a What Culture list or a Watch
Yep.
Mojo list of it's always Seven,
Yeah.
Sixth Sense, Usual Suspects. There's like but like this rarely comes up on
I
those
know.
lists. And it's one
I
of the
know.
great because the entire movie is about how you structure a twist. It's
Yes.
simultaneously a master course in screenwriting for like
Yes.
how to platform a twist and pull it off. And it's
Yeah.
also a commentary on magic, devotion to craft, obsession,
Yep.
all these. But like the fact that the screenplay is like, this screenplay is going to be a masterclass in how to write a twist into your movie
Yeah.
that's platformed the entire way through. And it's also simultaneously talking about like, here's how magic tricks are done.
Yeah.
And it was
And this
amazing.
and this movie is a magic trick.
Yeah. And for both of them,
Yeah.
both characters, both because that's this is something that every time I watch this movie, I get new things. And I don't think I ever quite got that. Like, it's not just so you already said it. If you're here, you know the movie. If you're, at this
Yep.
point, Christian Bale performs this trick called the transported man.
Yep.
And the whole movie is about how does he do this trick? He bounces a
Yep.
ball, he walks into a closet, he walks out of another closet on the other side of the stage and catches the ball.
Yep.
Really simple concept. How does he do it? How is he teleporting? And the
Yep.
thing is he's a twin. He has an identical twin brother and they share a life and they both pretend to be the same man and they go around, switching places and pretending to be the same person so that nobody knows there's two of them. And the movie at the very beginning, Michael Caine tells us every magic trick has three parts.
Yep.
It begins with the pledge, where you show the audience something ordinary and you sort
Mhm.
of make them a pledge that you're going to do something with this ordinary object.
Yes.
There's the turn, where you take the ordinary object and you make it do something extraordinary or
Yep.
magic. You make it disappear.
Yeah.
And then there's the prestige, which is where you bring it back and you make it, and like,
Yep.
and I used to always see this movie as all about Christian Bale's magic trick, but it's
Yeah.
also about Hugh Jackman's magic trick. And
Yeah.
both of their prestiges are revealed in the third act. Like,
They are. They're revealed. Yeah. And you're right. Every time I watch this movie, I get something new.
yeah,
And it is amazing how blatantly in your face the twist is the whole time. And Michael Caine talks about it, right? He's like, you're not really looking for the answer. Like
yeah,
in the pledge, you're not or the turn, you're not really looking for the answer because you want to be fooled,
yeah,
right? And throughout the whole movie, Christian Bale is seen as Borden and Fallon. Fallon is his twin, who puts on makeup and he looks like a different character. And he is in the movie, and within the first 5 minutes, he's with his daughter, and you see him, and you don't get a close up, but you see him pretty close. And he is throughout the movie, and he talks, and he has close ups, and Fallon is a character in the movie. Now, granted, they hide it really, really well.
but also, like, Fallon's the weirdest character in a
Oh,
movie ever. If
oh,
it's
he
not,
is.
if it's not part of it, like the fact that you don't notice that on the first time you're watching
Yeah,
it, that it's like, who is that guy? And
yeah,
like I asked my girlfriend at the end of the movie, I said, "Did you have any thoughts about who Fallon was?" And she goes,
yeah,
"I literally just thought he was like a weird guy that Christian Bale worked with." And I was like, I
yeah,
was like, I was like, I was like, when you look back and think about it, it's like, why they're making such a big deal
yeah,
about this guy who's very clearly strange and like
yeah,
he doesn't talk, he's like silent the entire movie, and every
yep.
time you get a look at his face, it's like, who is that?
I
Like,
know, it's
he looks like he's obviously wearing makeup and like
yeah,
obviously wearing a fake nose, and
yeah,
it's like the fact that you don't immediately go, that's a guy wearing a disguise is
yeah.
crazy.
Well,
It's
I
like,
remember, so this came out in 2006. I saw this with my brother Colin.
yeah,
Chandler was on his mission. So we went and we saw it. And I remember seeing it and thinking, who is this Fallon guy? Like,
Yeah.
this is some pretty bad writing. I was actually like, I'm pretty surprised that Nolan would do this. Like, he's usually really good at like character development and like introducing characters. And I was like, that was pretty poor.
Yeah.
And like, so I noticed that. And then like as it went on, I was like, who is this actor? Like
Yeah.
who is this guy? And then it showed it, and I was like, what? So me and Colin were like, our minds were blown. Right. We were just
But
like,
the fact
what the
that
heck?
it doesn't even enter your mind that it could be
No,
Christian Bale wearing
no,
makeup.
no.
Like, it does.
I never thought that. And it shows his face for longer than you realize.
Oh, yeah.
So, so Chandler came home from his mission at the end of 2006. This was the first movie that we showed him.
Yeah.
We were like, all right, we gotta show you the Prestige. He's like, oh, okay. So like we showed it again. Just, I mean, watching this movie with somebody who hasn't seen it is one of the best things. Like,
I've watched this movie with people who haven't seen it many
yeah,
times in my life.
yeah.
I've never seen anybody get it.
Oh, me either.
I've
No.
never seen anybody even have like a guess. And it's not because the movie is going out of its way to hide the reveal from you. The movie is being overt about the reveal the
Yeah,
entire time. So Hugh Jackman's Prestige is the first shot of the film.
yeah,
The first shot of the film is Hugh Jackman's Prestige. Like,
yeah.
the opening shot is a bunch of hats on a field, and you go, "Don't know what that is."
Yep,
And you just go, "I have no idea what that is."
yep,
But the movie is going, "This is what Hugh Jackman does to achieve
yeah,
the transported man."
yeah. Are
He
you
ha-
watching closely?
are you watching closely? He
Yep.
builds a machine that doesn't
Yeah.
teleport him, it clones him, and it sends a
Yes.
clone of him to, yeah, like, you know,
To a different spot. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
um,
Yeah, let's go through the movie so we can
yeah,
talk about
yeah,
each, because there's so many things that I first of all, there's so many things that you get, and
mhm,
there's so many things that you miss each time. But yeah,
yeah,
just like you said, it starts out with the hats, and then it shows him entering the machine, and you hear Michael Caine talking about the Prestige, just like, or the three acts of a magic trick, and he goes in, and we see that we see that Hugh Jackman falls through a trapdoor. He falls into a
tank
um,
of water.
tank of water. Thank you.
Yep,
And Christian Bale is sitting there just watching him. And you could tell that he is dying. Hugh Jackman is dying, and Christian Bale is just watching him. And then the next scene, we go to the courtroom.
mhm,
And this is down the line, pretty much near the end of the film.
yeah,
And Christian Bale is on trial, and they're talking about the magic trick. And Michael Caine, it's almost as if he was just explaining that to the court,
yeah,
what a magic trick consists of, right?
yeah,
And so he's there, and he sees his daughter with Fallon. This is the first time that we see Fallon.
yeah.
And the daughter waves, so our attention is to her, not to this guy who's with her.
Misdirection.
Yep, just like, okay,
Misdirection.
we don't know who it is. Like, it's just
Yep.
some guy that she's with. And he waves at her. Now, this is the thing that I'm gonna go through. So there's two twins.
Yeah.
Christian Bale plays two distinct characters.
Mhm.
There's only a few times that we don't really know who it is, and they're very minor parts. But
And we don't know what their actual names are, but the names that they go by are Alfred and Freddy. Those are like
yeah,
those are
well,
the two personalities, you
yeah,
know?
and
Yeah.
it is funny because in the book, I guess their names are Albert and Frederick.
Okay. And
So
then they
then
combined
Albert,
their names to
so like,
Alfred,
yeah,
to
Alfred, yep,
Alfred. And
Al
that
and Fred, right?
Yep, that
It's
makes
kind of,
sense.
yeah.
And
So
one of them prefers to be called Alfred, and the other one prefers to be called Freddy.
Freddie, yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, and
Mhm.
there's what, so to make this easy, at least on myself, how I distinguish them, I call them the good Borden and the bad Borden.
Absolutely. And
Yes.
Freddy's the bad one. And
Freddie's the bad one,
yep.
Albert's the good
Mhm.
one, Al
Yep.
is the good one. Yeah. And
Absolutely.
so the bad one, bad Borden is on
Mhm.
trial.
Yes.
He's the one in there. Good Borden is the one with his daughter.
Mhm.
Okay, so throughout this, we'll just kind of say either if it's good Borden or bad Borden. I figure that's
Yeah.
an easy way to kind of distinguish them.
Sure.
So anyway, he's in the courtroom, and Michael Caine, whose name is Cutter, they're all trying to figure out the prestige of this trick, and he says, "I can't tell you. Like, I have the right to sell it, and if I tell you, it'll be giving away my livelihood." Right.
Yeah.
So the judge is like, "Hey, you can reveal it to me, and I won't tell anybody." And then we kind of, let's see, after that,
But he also he kind of explains too, like, Michael Caine's position is understandable. Like, these two men, we come to find out in the movie, had this lifelong rivalry and this hatred of
yes,
each other. But Michael Caine's like, I found, Borden.
Yeah.
locking Hugh Jackman's character in this tank that
Yes.
has a particular significance to them, and like I think that he sabotaged the trick so that
Yes.
he could murder him, and yeah, and basically Bad Borden gets convicted of the
Yeah.
murder of Hugh Jackman's character, and then we start reading their diaries. We go
Yes.
into Hugh
So it cuts
Jackman.
yeah,
Yeah,
you cut to the middle of the movie when
yep,
Hugh Jackman is in Colorado,
yep,
and he gets to Colorado, and he's got a limp. So
yeah,
you know that in the middle of the movie, he gets a limp, right? So
yeah,
he goes up and he's like, "Oh, the whole town has electricity." He goes to see Tesla.
yeah.
So Nikola Tesla is a character in this movie. He goes to see
By
him.
the way, are you watching closely?
Oh, and your tattoo. Don't you have a tattoo?
I
You
do
have
have a
that tattoo.
tattoo. As I have a which is harder to see. I don't know how to get it into the camera, but I have a
It's right there.
David.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I'm wearing David Bowie
David
plays
Bowie.
Nikola Tesla in this movie, and it's awesome.
He's in barely any of the movie, but he makes an impact.
He's awesome
He
in
is
this
awesome.
movie. Yeah.
He is like, and it's kind of crazy. Like the more you watch it, the more you're like, okay, he keeps telling him not to do it. But anyway, we'll get to that.
Yeah.
We'll get to that. But
Mhm.
yeah, David Bowie's Tesla. We don't see him. He goes. Hugh Jackman goes up and he goes to Tesla's compound, and then Andy Serkis, the great Andy Serkis, he comes
Mhm.
out and he knows who he is, and he's like, "Hey, I'm staying down in town. Like, I want Tesla to build a machine for me that he built for somebody else."
Right.
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 So it's all kind of laying the groundwork for what is going
And
to
this is
happen.
like Andy Serkis before he was Andy Serkis
Yeah.
too, which is
Yeah, it
cool.
was. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
So let's see. And then so they both have each other's diaries. That's
Mhm.
something we find out that Hugh Jackman is reading Borden's diary. And
Borden's in prison. Bad Borden's
yes.
in prison reading Hugh Jackman's
Well, and
diary.
we forgot
Yeah.
something as well. We forgot something.
Yeah.
So when Borden is in prison, he meets with a guy named Owens, who's a
Right.
solicitor. And
Right.
Owens works for Lord Caldlow.
Mhm.
And he's like, "Oh, he's an amateur magician. He's really interested in the case. He's going to buy all these things." And
You're
he says,
dying anyway. Would you sell all your
"Yes,
tricks to him? Like, if you're
yes,
dying, why don't you sell your tricks to Lord Caldlow? Yeah.
yeah." And this is the
Yeah.
thing that I never really realized until these last few times of watching it. He says, "Well, he's like, well, Lord Caldwell will take care of your daughter."
Mhm.
And he says, "Well, Fallon's going to take care of him." And he's like, "Oh, Fallon, someone who has as little of a past as you."
Dude, again, this movie is playing in your
Right?
face the entire time. Like
The entire
it
time.
it's just like blatant stuff where he's like, nobody knows who this Fallon guy is. He's got a very he says literally he has as mysterious of a past as you do. And it's
Yep.
like if you're paying attention, if you're watching closely, why would the screenplay say that about these characters so
Yeah.
early in the movie and be like, both Fallon and Borden have mysterious pasts and
Yep.
nobody knows who Fallon is?
Yeah.
Why would that be mentioned at all if Fallon's not significant
Yeah.
to
To
Borden's
Borden.
prestige?
Yeah,
Yeah, uh-huh.
exactly. So he
Yeah,
says like, oh, he said the court ordered that she be taken away. So she's going to be going into foster care or she'll be an orphan. Right.
yeah.
And I never really noticed that before. And I was like, oh, that's why he's going to sell his tricks to Lord Caldlow,
To save his
because
daughter.
Lord Caldlow can save his daughter.
Yeah.
So he says, okay, he'll do it. And then we go into, but Owens gives him the diary
Mhm.
of
Algier.
Algier,
Algier, who is,
Robert Algier, who is Hugh Jackman.
yeah. Mhm. Yeah.
So then he starts reading the diary. We go to Colorado. He tells Tesla he's going to be there, and then it goes back to the very beginning of their relationship.
Yeah,
And
they were
so
young men who were kind of working as assistants to this magician where they
yeah,
would, pretend to be, audience members, and they would come up and tie up Robert Algier's wife,
yes,
who and they would, they would use these knots that she would kind of slip out of. She would drop into the tank of water
yep,
that Hugh Jackman eventually dies in, that we as the audience at this point in the movie know that's the same tank that Hugh Jackman died in at the end, or at the
yes,
beginning of the film, at the end of the film. But, now we see that they do this trick with Hugh Jackman's wife, and they have this conversation afterward backstage where like, and
yeah.
this is Bad Borden, I
Bad
believe.
Borden. This is
This
Bad
bad
Borden.
Bad Borden really wants to try this other knot called the Langford double that he feels like will
Yes.
hold tighter, but Michael Caine's character Cutter says you can't do that because it's not a wet knot and she won't be able
Yeah.
to slip it. And she assures both Hugh Jackman and Cutter, I think I can slip it. It's okay.
Yeah.
And Bad Borden, who's very arrogant, and
Yeah.
he's just like He's like,
He
it's a tighter knot. It'll hold. I promise. The lane for double is
whoa.
better.
It's a bet. Oh no, yeah,
Yeah,
and it really like he is very much, and this really goes into his character
yeah,
because Bad Borden and the good Borden is this way to an extent as well, but
mhm.
Bad Borden wants to push magic. He is all about the magic tricks. He's
I also
about the magic tricks. Sorry,
yeah. I wonder what you think about this too, because I think they both really like magic,
they
but
do.
I think that Bad Borden is more of the showman. I think he
Yes,
likes to because like we talk about how like sometimes Alfred's not a very good performer, and I
he's
think
not.
that Good Borden is just a little less of a performer, and Bad Borden's like more of a showman, and he's more of a
Yeah.
like
So
yeah.
what I perceive it as is that good Borden is like the engineer. He can create the
Mhm.
magic, and bad Borden is good at it as well.
Mhm.
But good Borden is the one who figures it out quicker and
Yeah.
who understands it immediately. And
Yeah.
then bad Borden is the one who can perform it, and he is good at that as well. But that's kind of the dynamic that I see. That good Borden's a little bit smarter at coming up with the tricks, and
Yeah.
bad Borden is better at performing them.
I think that's right. In this is the next scene when Borden meets his wife? When is that
Let's
where we
see.
go next?
So he complains about the tricks, and then oh, they say Chinaman. They go see
Oh,
the
this is great. And
Chung
again,
Lun Si, or I forgot his name, but they go see the
yeah,
magician, the
yep.
Chinese magician,
Cutter tells them, "Whoever can tell me how he does
fishbowl trick.
the fishbowl trick, I'll give you 5 minutes on stage with this,
Yeah,
other,
with the
like,
guy who
prominent."
appears at the end of the movie. But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And they go and watch this guy he's this old Chinese guy who
yes,
walks around on stage with, like he can barely move, and he does this amazing trick where he reveals
yeah,
this giant fishbowl, and, Christian Bale's character knows how it's done immediately.
immediately.
And he points it out to Hugh Jackman and he says, "Everything about this guy's life is the act. Everything
Yeah,
about his life is the trick. He walks around carrying things between his legs all
yeah,
the time, and he makes it look like he walks with a limp s all the
yeah,
time so that no one suspects that this frail old man would be able to carry things between his legs."
yes,
And again, this is the movie, once again, it does it again and again and again. Once again, the movie telling us the
yeah.
reason why Christian Bale knows this is because that's what Christian Bale
Yeah.
does, is
He
he
says, yeah, he's like,
yeah,
he says that's the real trick. First of all, this I think is good Borden. Say they made a switch
absolutely.
because
Yeah,
he is very good. Borden is much more tame,
yeah,
and he's like pretty even keeled, and
yeah,
he figures it out immediately. That's why I think he's really more the engineer, right? And
yeah,
so he says that's the trick.
yeah,
The trick is that's the only way that you can really get out, make a great performance is if you live your trick,
yep,
which is what he's doing. Him and
and
his brother are doing.
he's always trying to explain to Algier that, like, real good
Yeah.
magic requires risk and sacrifice and, like,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
you have to sacrifice for your art and stuff like
Yes.
that, and
You gotta get
yeah,
your hands dirty. So there's a
yeah.
few things they talk about. You gotta sacrifice, you gotta get your hands dirty, and
I think bad Borden always says, "Get your hands dirty,"
he
and
does.
good Borden says, "Sacrifice."
Sacrifice. I
Yeah,
think you're right. I think
mhm,
actually if I went back, that's probably exactly
yeah,
what it is.
mhm,
Um, but yeah, he says, you gotta get your hands dirty. And I
yeah,
noticed this on um let's see. So I noticed this on this rewatch as well. Whenever Hugh Jackman goes on stage, like when he's the plant and he goes on stage, he bows to the crowd.
yeah,
And we'll get to that later why that's important to him. But I noticed that this time that he's always like playing for the crowd because he is a very good showman. His
yep, yep.
character is a good showman. But anyway,
Hugh
so the
Jackman cares much more about the adoration of the
yes,
crowd than he does about really the craft of magic. Even the
exactly.
way that Hugh Jackman goes about doing his transported man trick eventually isn't about being a great magician, it's just about beating Borden. It's just
Exactly.
about yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. So
but
he's talking after that show, he's talking with his wife and he reveals how the guy does it. You see him with the fishbowl between his legs and this part also, this is the part that I didn't get until like the third or fourth time I saw it, and maybe even more than that. I've seen this movie a ton.
mhm.
But he's talking to his wife and he's like, I can't imagine Hugh Jackman says, I can't imagine living a life as someone else, which he's referring to
The Chinese
the
performer
magician,
yeah,
yes,
yeah,
Chinese performer,
uh,
but he is actually because she says, "Well, what do you call changing your name or whatever?" He is not Robert Angier. he
Right.
is Lord Caldlow. Like,
Yeah.
he is, so that he is living a different life.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and this is when they tell you, he's like, "Oh, changing your name is hardly living a different life." Right?
Yeah.
He's like, "I don't want my family to be worried about my theatrical endeavors." Right?
Right.
And so
He didn't
that's
want
like,
doesn't want his family to be embarrassed by his
yes,
theatrical endeavors, which
yes,
means which means he comes from means and his
yes,
family is of elevated status, which is why he's a
yes.
lord and he's like
Yeah,
independently wealthy. He's Lord Caldlow. So
yeah,
I never caught that. So that's why he's able to shift over to this other persona after he
yes.
dies because it's actually who he
It is
legally
who
is.
he yes. And he
And
says he
yeah.
says in that moment, he says, "I've always been Lord Caldlow."
Yeah.
And
So
yes, it's crazy. That's where it's revealed that he is someone else.
I want to really quickly too say
Okay.
if anyone heard Kramer say Chinaman
I know,
earlier,
and I
that's
do.
that's a quote from the movie.
Yes,
That
thank you for saying, and I
that
do
yeah.
apologize. That's what they say. That's why I
Yeah, no,
tried to quote
yeah.
it.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
would
yeah.
I apologize if that
I
made anybody upset, but that
no, as we were talking about, I was like, we should clarify that
yeah, let's clarify.
yeah,
And that
yeah,
was from
yeah.
the movie.
That's
He
from
is a
that's
Chinese performer. I
yeah,
apologize. But
yeah.
yes, yeah, thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, but
Um,
anyway, is it after this that, Alfred meets
yes.
his wife? This is a great scene too. Every scene in this movie is telling you how the trick is done. Every scene in the that's what's so my girlfriend's like a screenwriter, and so I'm
Yes.
sitting there with her watching this movie going like, "How are you is this?" Because 'cause I'm watching it going, "This is heavy-handed." Like, after having
Yeah.
seen it I've seen this
Oh,
movie
yeah.
probably 15 times now, and I'm like, at this point, I'm going, this movie's laying it on thick. It's,
Oh,
like,
it is.
really in your face, and
Yeah.
I get and I keep looking at her going, "Are you picking this up? Are you seeing that, like, this" so, there's
That's
a
what I
great
do with
scene
my kids, yeah.
yeah, and it's like, Christian Bale's character who is good
Good
Borden.
good Borden, yeah.
Good Borden is doing, some tricks for some people in the town, and he does this, trick where,
Well, it's another magician.
oh, he's
He's
assist
doing
yeah,
yeah,
that's
he's
right,
assisting this
that's
other
right.
magician, yeah.
He's assisting another magician, and they do a disappearing bird trick, and it's a bird in a cage, and then the cage disappears, and then the bird comes back, and this little boy in the audience starts crying, and Christian Bale comes out and talks to the little boy, and he says, It's okay, he came back," and he goes, "But what happened to his brother?" And
Yeah.
and it's like, that line is just like, "Oh my
Yeah,
gosh, what
and
happened to his brother?"
and then it's so cool because Borden is like, "That's a smart lad, your son," and she says,
And you
"No,
see
he's my nephew."
Christian Bale's performance in this movie
Oh,
is phenomenal.
it's crazy.
The way that he carries the difference between the 2 brothers and,
Yes.
like, these moments of recognition on his face where the little kid says, "What happened to his brother?" And you see immediately on his face, like, "Whoa, wow, this
Yeah, like,
kid's"
"Oh, you got
like
it."
not a lot of people see that,
Yeah,
and, like, that's a smart kid you've got there, and
yeah,
then she goes, "Oh, this is my nephew," and then,
yeah. Well,
he
and it is pretty funny because, again, this movie is telling you what's gonna happen.
right,
One brother dies and the other one doesn't, right?
right,
And
right,
he even says, right, Borden says, "You were the lucky one today," and then he dumps out the dead brother,
right.
which is pretty crazy, and I told that to my kids. I was like, "Hey, you remember that scene?" Like, I took him upstairs, and then I told him about the birds, like, "Remember when the kid said, 'Where's his brother?'" And they both went, "What?" And my son, like, went around the corner, he's like, "I can't even believe it." Again,
There's so much like my girlfriend afterward she just kept being like she goes, "I honestly like the whole time watching it was just kind of like, yeah, this is like it's
yeah,
entertaining." She
yeah.
goes, "And now as I'm just sitting and thinking about it, I'm like every single scene in that movie had something that was
Oh,
talking."
yeah,
And I'm like, "Yeah, it's crazy."
yeah.
So okay, so what happens after that? Does he
So
follow
he
her
goes,
home?
yeah, well,
Or
they're waiting for him. He gives the kid a coin, right? And he
yeah.
says, "Don't ever, everybody will tell you the secret, but you never give them the secret because they don't care about it once they find out what the truth is." Right?
Yeah.
So he goes back, he takes her back to her apartment, and then
This is a
he's
scene
like,
where it's like the movie is just blatantly
yeah,
get like
he's
is just
yeah, he's like,
yeah.
"Oh, I'd love a cup of tea." She's like, "Well, my landlord won't let me." And so he's like, "Oh, you think that lock can hold me?" He walks away. She goes inside her apartment, and then Bad Borden is there, and he's like, "Oh, what do you want? Cream and sugar, right?"
Yeah.
And he's like, and she just laughs. She thinks it's so
And
funny.
the fact that everyone on first watch, every time everyone's watching this movie for the first time, you just take it as though, oh, Christian Bale's character is a magician, so he did a magic trick. But
Yep.
it's like,
Yep.
that's an impossible magic trick.
Yeah.
You can't you
He
can't
didn't
wa
he can't
you
do that.
you can't walk down the stairs and then teleport into a person's
Yeah.
apartment. Like
Mhm.
but you literally just kind of go, oh, this is just movies being like
Yeah.
bad at
Yep.
writing magic, like
Right.
you just sort of
Right.
write it off as like, oh, the movie's doing a cheeky little like
Yep.
magic, but it's like that's not a possible
It
magic trick. Like
that's impossible.
that's
Yep.
impossible. And her character just sort of giggles at it too. It's like, and she should be like, hey, what the crap,
Yeah. Like that,
but
how did
like,
that happen? But yeah, she
yeah,
laughs it off.
yeah, she laughs it off. It's
Yeah.
charming.
Yeah, it's
Um,
charming. And then we
yeah.
cut back to the end, and Cutter is talking to the judge,
Um,
and he's talking about the machine. And he's like, "Oh, this is the machine that, he said." And then Cutter says, "Well, this machine, came from a man who can do what magicians pretend to do."
mhm,
And he's like, and the judge is like, "Well, I'm sure there's a harmless explanation." He's like, "No, that's the thing, is that this is real." And
mhm.
he's totally serious.
Yeah.
And the judge is like, "Okay, right." So it's just kind of a cool scene. It's a really nice, like,
Oh, it's
setting
great.
of the mood.
And
Yeah.
I remember the first time I saw this really piqued my interest because I was like,
Yeah.
"Oh, we're not just talking about, like,
Yeah.
magic tricks anymore, we're talking about, like, supernatural stuff."
Yeah, we are.
And
Yep.
yeah, uh-huh, yeah,
And then we actually go to the death of Hugh Jackman's wife.
yep.
So they do the same trick. They go up on stage. Hugh Jackman is tying her legs, and then Borden is tying her wrists.
There's
And
kind
he
of a
looks,
nod between Borden and her that he's gonna
yes.
do the Langford double.
Yeah, he changes the
Yeah,
knot and he
mhm.
does it. She gets in the tank, falls in the tank, and then the magician is like, looks at Cutter and is like, she's not out. You got to come save her. And so,
This great thing that he does both times we see this, where Cutter's backstage with a stopwatch and an axe, and
yes.
it shows you kind of like the danger that even though this isn't it's all planned and it's all part of the act and it's, she's a trained escape
Yep.
artist and everything like that, it's still possible that she might get stuck and he would have to come and break the glass with.
Right.
And so,
Yep.
yeah, that's what happens.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
goes, he tries to break the glass. She is drowning. Like,
Mhm.
it's very clear that she's in there. He's hitting it with like everything he has, and she drowns. He finally gets the tank open, and Hugh Jackman's like just trying to pat her face. And at this point, CPR was not invented, so they
Yeah,
couldn't really revive anybody. So they have no idea what to do.
right.
And she dies.
Yeah.
She dies. And then we see Hugh Jackman like not practicing drowning, just like seeing what it's like to drown, which
Yeah.
is also really great foreshadowing in the
Yep.
end.
Yep. Really great
Um,
foreshadowing. He's grieving and he's dunking his face into a
yeah.
tank of water, but it's also and then, yeah, we go to the funeral, which
Oh,
we have this great line where Cutter, to try to comfort Algier, says to him, "I once had a friend who
yeah.
drowned, for like 5 minutes off of a
Yeah.
boat, and he was rescued, and when we asked him, what was it like drowning? And he said it was like going home." And he
Yeah.
says this to him to kind of comfort him, and then I believe this
Good
is good Borden.
good Borden shows up. That's what
Good
I'm gonna say.
Borden
Good Borden
yep.
shows up.
Good Borden shows up to the funeral to express his condolences to
Yeah.
Algier, who asks him, "What knot did you tie?" And again, this movie it's pulling no punches whatsoever. He
Nope.
says, "I've been asking myself that same question, and I just don't know." And it's
And he's telling the
literally
truth.
and he's telling the truth. I've been fighting with my brother. We've been back at our place going, "What did you do?" I've been asking my brother, "What did you do?" And my brother won't tell me. He just is
Yeah.
like, my
It's either he won't tell him, or good Borden said, "Don't tell me so I can actually say I don't know."
yeah,
Right? Or don't ever yeah, whatever it was, he
whatever
doesn't
it
know.
was.
Good
Yeah,
Borden does not know what
yep,
knot was tied. And
yeah,
it's
uh-huh,
yeah, and I've gotta say, this scene is so beautiful,
yeah,
beautifully shot.
yeah,
So this movie was nominated for 2 Academy Awards, production design and cinematography,
mm,
and it's very well, or I mean, it should have been nominated for more in my opinion. But those
absolutely.
2,
Should have been
like,
nominated for best original screenplay for
it
sure.
should have been.
Yeah.
Well, actually, it's adapted. It's a book, so it
Okay,
should have been
best
adapted
adapted
screenplay.
screenplay,
Yeah.
best actor Christian Bale for
Yeah,
sure. Yeah,
absolutely.
uh-huh,
But,
yeah.
Wally Pfister, he shot the movie, absolutely beautiful, and Nathan Crowley did the production design. Also, just this scene, I
Oh,
remember seeing this in the theater, and I was like, this is amazing. Like, it just
Yeah.
looks so beautiful, and the whole movie is shot so well.
Oh,
So I wish they would have gotten those because they deserved them, I felt. But anyway, that's a great scene, and it's really emotional because he
yeah.
he walks away, and you could tell Hugh Jackman is very upset.
Yeah.
And then after that, we go to Borden's apartment or wherever he's using to practice his tricks. And this is where we meet Fallon. He's like, "Oh, this is Fallon. He's my engineer." And he's like, "Oh, he says a line. I can't remember what he says, but it's kind of like
It's like the only thing he says in the entire movie, and it's, like, very quiet and, like,
he says a
muted.
couple things, but yeah, it's
Yeah, yeah.
it's
But
not many.
also, like, we've seen Fallon before, and
Yep.
again, every time we see Fallon, it's just sort of like, it should be screaming at the audience, "Who is that?"
Yeah.
This is we know that Christian Bale's character has a big secret. We know that there's a
Mhm.
big secret to a big secret trick he's trying to do,
Yeah.
and there's this character Fallon, and somehow, the first time you watch this movie, you just sort of accept the weirdness of
You do.
Fallon.
You do.
Yeah.
Because
Uh-huh.
he's like, "Oh, he's gonna help me with my tricks." And you think, "Okay, it's just some guy he's his
Right.
ingénieur, the
Right.
one who comes up with the tricks." So,
Right.
and then she's like, "Well, we can't afford to pay him." Fallon leaves, understandably so. He leaves, and
Mhm.
then she's like, "We can't afford to pay him." He's like, "Oh, I'll share half my food with him," right? Which
Mhm.
he's probably been doing his whole life. So,
Yep.
and then he's like, "Okay, I want to show you this trick. It's the bullet catch." And he's like, "Shoot me," right? She's like, "No, I can't shoot you." And so she points the gun over, she shoots, and he's like, "Oh," and he catches it. And then she's like, "Well, how do you do it?" And he's like, "Well, it's magic. I can't tell you."
Yeah.
And then Sarah gets mad.
Yeah.
She's like, "Well, then you can't do it." And
Mhm.
this is actually the point where you can see that this bothers Bad Borden because this is Bad Borden.
Yeah.
He's like, "I can't do it." Like
Yeah.
he's like, because Bad Borden doesn't really like Sarah.
Yeah.
And this is where it kind of starts, at least for me on this watch. I saw
Well,
like,
but it also just shows you, like, the sacrifice of these 2 brothers that,
yeah,
like, that Bad Borden or Freddie has to be willing to pretend to court this woman that he's
yes,
not interested in,
yeah,
and that's a big ask of your brother,
it is.
and I mean, like, and so he's doing his best, but when Sarah says stuff like this to him, he's like,
Well, yeah,
you
because he
know
he reveals the trick. He's like, "Okay,
Right.
well, you put the ramrod in, and it's in the ramrod." And she's like, "Well, now that you know it, it is quite silly, And he gets kind of like, he's like, "This is a really dangerous trick. Like, someone could put a button, or they could put a bullet in there."
Yeah.
And she's like, "Well, you better be careful because we've got another person that you have to share with." Or no, sorry, she tells him that before she does the
Yeah.
trick.
She's
She's
pregnant.
pregnant,
Yeah.
and he's like, "Oh, we should have told Fallon
Right.
because we
Again, we
actually
should
I
have told Fallon because
yeah,
Fallon is probably actually the guy that you conceived the baby with. Yeah.
most likely,
Yeah.
most
Uh-huh.
likely."
Yeah.
So he's like, "Oh, we should have told Fallon." He shows her the trick, and then he's like, "Well," they kind of have that little bit of fight, and he's like, "Well, it's not a big deal because I love you very much." And she's like, "Say it again." And he says, "I love you." And she's like, "No, you don't love me today." And he's like
Mhm.
he's like, "What are you talking about?" And she's like, "Some days you mean it, but some days you don't." And it makes it better on the days she actually likes it, when she's like, "It makes it more special when you do actually mean it."
But again, this is the movie just telling us, like,
Yep.
that this man is divided, that he
Yeah,
is
he is.
that it's some days he loves Sarah, some days he doesn't, some days he's
Mhm.
very nice and level-headed, and some days he's kind of arrogant, and, like, it's all there, you
It is
know?
all there. Yep.
Yeah.
And the
Mhm.
first time I saw this,
Yeah.
I was like, "That's dumb." Like,
Yeah.
I thought in my head, like, "That's a little weird and cheesy."
Mhm.
But every time after, I'm like, I love this.
That
I love
Sarah,
that he does this,
on
that
some
Sarah can
level,
tell.
she I think that on some level, Sarah and eventually Olivia can always tell the difference
Yeah.
between
Yep.
Alfred and Freddie, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I love that she says this, and the way that Christian Bale performs this. After this, I was like, you can tell he's really forcing it.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
he is forcing that "I love you," and it does not feel genuine.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and so when he does say "I love you" the other times, you can tell it's good Borden, right? So
Yeah.
just a really, really, like, good performance
Yep.
and good screenwriting. Everything is great.
So then
So
we go to the bullet catch, don't we?
yeah, let's see. So, yeah, he doesn't love her.
Yeah.
Yep, and then yeah.
Yeah.
So
And
they
I
go to the
I
show.
I think because of how kind of, like, awkward the showmanship is here, I think that it's Good Borden
It
who's
it's for
performing
sure
tonight.
good Borden. It
So
is.
it's Good Borden who's performing tonight, and we see, he's kind of an awkward showman. He's doing this sort of
Yeah.
awkward he's doing a kind of a
Yeah, he's like
party trick
the
with rings, and people
yeah,
are laughing at him, and they're heckling him, and
yeah.
and I think, like, kinda see that he's like, "Okay, well, fine. We'll do the bullet catch. We'll do the"
Yeah, he's like, "This is what you want," and he points the
Yeah.
gun at
Yeah.
the whole audience,
Yeah.
and then he, like, tells Fallon, "Alright, get somebody," and the person who comes up the volunteer that comes up on stage, which you can see Hugh Jackman in the background.
Mhm.
Hugh Jackman comes up and he puts a bullet in the gun.
And he's wearing a disguise. He's
He's
kind of
wearing
like
a
where yeah,
disguise.
yeah.
He's got, like, a goatee on and, like, his hair is a
That's
little different.
that's the other thing is there's so many scenes where our main characters wear disguises in this movie, and
Yeah,
we know they're wearing disguises. Like, there are so many scenes where
yeah,
Christian Bale will be wearing fake facial hair, and we know
yeah,
he's wearing fake facial hair, or where Hugh Jackman is wearing fake facial hair, and we see these characters putting on disguises
yes, yeah.
and we still don't clock Fallon as possibly a
No,
guy. Yeah,
a
yeah.
guy wearing makeup and a
Yeah, yeah,
disguise.
yeah,
Nope, we
yeah,
never get it. Nope.
yeah. Uh-huh.
So he gets and you see this a few times too, like, Hugh Jackman, like, pushes his way up to get the gun.
Yeah.
He makes sure he's the one, and
Mhm.
he gets it, and then he points the gun at him, and immediately, Borden can tell who it is, and he puts his hands up, right? And he's like,
Yep.
"Which knot did you tie?" And he
Mhm.
says, "I don't know."
Yeah.
And that's why you know that's one of the reasons why you know that it's good Borden
Right.
is because good Borden does not
I don't know.
know.
Yeah.
He truly does not know which knot was tied.
Mhm.
And so Hugh Jackman closes his eyes. Fallon also is shown in this scene a lot. And
Mhm.
he's kind of like sneaking up on him. And right before he pulls the trigger, Fallon grabs his hand and he shoots off two of Good Borden's fingers.
Yep.
And
Yep.
but he gets away. Hugh Jackman gets away, and he's
Yeah.
got two fingers that are blown off.
Yeah.
And yep.
Yeah. So then would we are we back to
Well, and then we go.
Hugh
And
Jack
then we go back to Hugh Jackman in Colorado.
right, that's what I
So
thought.
this is the middle of the movie because
Right.
Hugh Jackman is looking for what knot was tied.
Right.
And he finally reads in the diary. And in the diary, it's like, I keep telling myself and I keep thinking about it, but I cannot remember what knot was tied.
And it says one half of me is sure I didn't tie a length for double, and the other half of me thinks I maybe I did.
Yeah,
And so it's like there is an admission there,
there
but
is.
it's yeah, but it's still
Yeah.
it's all there. It's all being kind of
Yep.
honest, but yeah, Hugh Jackman frustrated. He's like, how could he not know?
Yeah.
How could he
And
yeah, uh-huh.
he's really frustrated.
Yeah.
So, but Hugh Jackman gets together with Cutter, with Michael Caine, and he's like, "Oh, we're gonna do a magic trick. We're gonna, I need someone. No one's gonna work with me. The person who killed, this person's magician's assistant."
Yeah.
And Hugh Jackman's like, "Well, the only person that'll work with you is the one who knows that, you know,
That
who
you weren't
knows."
responsible for it.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and so but they come up with this new way of doing the disappearing bird trick, which I've always loved this. This is like a
yeah,
really cool
yeah,
this is a really cool little detail of like and it's like it's also like a real contraption from like
yeah,
this like it's like and so it's like this contraption that Hugh Jackman wears as a vest
yeah,
that
yeah,
is like spring loaded and it's basically a bird cage that you hold and then it has these like spring components that go down the sleeves of your
yeah,
arms, and when you pull them away, the cage rips away.
yeah,
And Hugh Jackman he's told him, "I don't want to kill birds on
yeah,
stage to get cheap thrills." And and Cutter says to him something like, "Well, that's the gig, that's the
yeah,
job. You've got to get your hands dirty if you want to be a
yeah,
good magician." And then so he shows him this new thing, and he goes, "And here's the best part: you don't even need to kill the bird." He goes, "This contraption allows you to save the bird." And he goes, "Oh, I thought I had to get my hands dirty." And he's like,
yeah.
"Well, you just needed to be willing. I
Yeah,
just
he's like,
needed
"I
to
wanted to
know."
make sure you would,"
Yeah, and
which
this is also
comes
where
up
they
later.
hire Scarlett Johansson. She
Yes.
comes into the movie, and they hire her to be his like lovely assistant, and
Yep.
yeah, that
And
whole
she's a good
thing.
distraction, and
Yep.
she performs and he does say this, like, she's really good at performing,
Yeah.
which will come up later as well. So she's his assistant, but once he's performing the magic trick on stage, he asks for volunteers, and on this one, I actually really like because they show
Yeah, this is great. I know
Scarlett Johansson points to some guy, but Christian Bale stands up and then just goes in front of the guy.
Yep, he's not
And
selected. Yeah, Christian
no,
Bale's not the guy that's selected, and that's I don't think I noticed that the first few times I
I
watched
didn't
this
either.
movie,
Yeah,
but it's a
yeah,
fun detail that this other guy gets up and Christian Bale just cuts him off and just gets
yeah,
in front of him,
yep,
and it's such a great way that they shoot this because, again, Christian Bale's wearing a disguise, he's wearing a fake
yeah,
beard, and he walks up on stage and he puts his
yeah,
hand on top of the cage, and the way that Algier finds out it's Borden is he sees the fingers and he looks
yep,
up, and then
and
Borden snaps the cage
yeah,
on,
and
you
it
know.
breaks the girl's fingers and it kills the bird.
Yeah.
And I think, I in this scene, it really doesn't matter if it's good
Mhm.
Borden or bad Borden. I
Yeah.
think it's probably good Borden, just because
Yeah.
that's like the only because he was the one who got shot.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's what I'll
But
say.
do you think by this point he we could already be in the place where he's taken the where Bad Borden has also taken his fingers off,
Oh
or
yeah, he's already taken his fingers off.
yeah. So,
I imagine they did that like
yeah.
the day after or a
Yeah.
couple days after.
Well, because it's gotta be at least, like, a week after, because there's that
Maybe.
great
Yeah,
shot
that's true. Yeah.
where Sarah is helping him clean his hand,
Yeah.
and he says, "Sarah, that bloody hurts."
Yeah.
And then she
Yeah.
goes, she goes, "Man, it looks as bad as the first day that it happened." And it's because
Yeah,
it is
because
the
it
first
just
day that it
happened.
yeah, it just
Yeah.
happened, like, the day before, and
Yeah.
yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. No, that is a great scene. So
Yeah.
I think, yeah, it's either good or bad. I think it's
Yeah.
good. But
So he sabotages Algiers' new act and kind of like hurts his they're just kind of going back and forth and hurting each
yeah.
other's reputations and stuff like that. But is this when we get to him meeting Tesla for the first time,
Well,
or
it goes back to Colorado. He meets up with Allie, uh it's Andy Circus,
yeah.
and he's like, "Oh, let me show you some stuff." And they go into this field and they see the light bulbs. Again, another beautiful shot. Just
Oh,
like
it's
all these
amazing.
light bulbs on the ground.
Yeah.
And there's the scene itself doesn't really serve much of a purpose other than it looks beautiful and he realizes that Tesla can do the things that he wants him to do, which he
Yeah.
feels is real magic, which is
Yeah.
just science.
Tesla, yeah, can do some pretty trippy stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's
Mhm.
like, this is it really solidifies for Angier that
Mhm.
this is what Borden really did. So
Right.
we get that, and then we see oh yeah, then it cuts back to him in the past going to Tesla's presentation.
Right, and he sees Borden at this
Yeah.
presentation, so he assumes and Tesla's doing this presentation with, the electricity shooting everywhere, and
Yeah.
naturally, this is probably what happened in real life. People in the audience are terrified because it
Yeah.
looks very scary. He's trying to explain to them that
Yeah.
it's perfectly safe, and,
Yeah.
there's this whole kind of side story of, like what's interesting too
Edison.
is we've got this story about the rivalry between these 2 magicians, and we've
The
got this
rivalry.
side story about this rivalry between Edison and Tesla that
Yeah.
is sort of
Yeah.
unseen, but it's
It's there.
similarly mirrored,
Well, and
yeah.
yeah, and the guy who
Mhm.
yells, who's like,
Right.
"That thing's gonna blow."
Yeah.
He is someone who works for Edison,
Yeah.
and he
Mhm.
shows up in Colorado later,
Yep.
and he's the one who actually burns everything down. So
Yeah,
it's a
he's a
little cool little detail.
saboteur.
Yeah,
He's a saboteur that's sent to the presentation by Edison. And
exactly.
it's so interesting because it's like, yeah, this very similar story to Angier and Borden's rivalry is playing out as
Yes.
as a side story.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
Angier sees Borden there. Now, do you think that Borden literally just goes to this presentation as a misdirection for Angier? Do you think he's
No,
just there?
I think he went there too because Cutter says like this type of stuff captures people's imaginations.
Yeah.
I think this is well, it is good Borden
Mhm.
at the presentation because after it he goes and meets with
Mhm.
Sarah.
Mhm.
Angier follows him and
Mhm.
sees that he has a family and it just makes him more infuriated.
Mhm.
But he's with Sarah and he says, "I love you," right? He tells her and
Mhm.
she's like, "You mean it today?"
Yeah.
And he's like, "Of course I mean it." So that
Yeah.
was good board, and I think
Well,
it was more coincidence more than anything. I don't think he was trying to lure
I guess
Angier out or anything.
later on we do see that he incorporates into his act, Borden
Yes,
incorporates into his act,
the electricity.
the electricity and stuff as just like sort of showmanship. Just like
Exactly,
it's a way
exactly.
to dress it up, but it's not actually the mechanism by which he does the
Yes,
trick.
correct.
But
Yeah.
now we're to the turn really here because this
Mhm.
is where we learn about Borden's trick finally, right? This is where Angier finally goes and sees Borden's new act, right?
Oh, yeah, he goes let's see. Oh yeah, he says that like um there's a few little things he's reading the diary and he realizes that like Borden is a divided man.
Yeah. Mhm.
He decided okay, yeah. So because there's a few little things that like kind of go about like he he talks with Fallon. It goes back to Borden in jail. Bad Borden in
Mhm.
jail at the end of the
Mhm.
movie. And he's talking to Fallon
Yeah.
and he's like so they decided to take her away. Like he's talking with his daughter,
Yeah.
and this, she gets a pet or something. She wants to name it Sarah, which is a pretty
Mhm.
heartbreaking,
Yeah.
realization. But and then he decides basically he's like, there's nothing we can do. So he basically decides, okay, I'm gonna sell my tricks so that our daughter can be safe and then you can get her later. They never say that, but that's
Right.
basically what they decide.
Right.
And then later we see that Borden is writing down all of his tricks, and this is when he throws the ball up and it falls, and then he chains up the guard, which is just kind of a
Yeah.
funny little scene, like a showmanship scene. I thought that
Yeah,
it just
there's a funny little, like, magic trick that he does in the yard in prison.
yes.
It's also kind of, like, interesting because they just did Batman Begins together, and it's, like,
Yeah.
similar to Bruce Wayne being in the prison
Yeah.
yard at
Yeah.
the beginning of Batman Begins and, like,
Yeah.
find yeah.
There are
Um,
a few similarities. Yeah, it's kind of
yeah,
funny. But then after this is when Hugh Jackman finally meets Tesla. So
right.
we kind of see all that, and then he goes and he meets Tesla. Tesla walks through, yeah, and we finally get to see. This is pretty much like the midpoint of the movie.
Yeah.
This is kind of like he shows up. David Bowie shows up. He
Mhm.
walks through the electricity, which is such a cool
Yeah,
way to
it's
enter the
awesome.
movie. And
Yeah.
he's like walks through, and he's like he shakes his hand, and he's like, "Hold out other hand," and he like gives him the bulb, and they light the electricity, and they light the bulb with their bodies, which is really cool. And then they go out onto the porch, and this is when like David Bowie really shines
Yeah.
because he's like, you know, I can't remember how the conversation goes, but basically he's like, "Have you ever considered the cost?" And Hugh Jackman says, "Well, money's no object." And he's like, "I know, but have you considered the cost?"
Right.
And he's like, "I can recognize an obsession. You need to just let this go, and you need to
Yeah.
just like put it
He
away."
basically tried to dissuade him,
Yeah,
"Don't do this. This
yeah,
thing that you're asking me to build for you, it's only going to be bad for you. Trust
yeah,
me. Like, don't do this." And then, Hugh Jackman basically says, "Look, man, if you understand obsession, you know you're not gonna dissuade me, so
yeah.
just start making my machine." And he goes, "I've already started building it,"
Yeah.
you know?
And it
And
really is like it's pretty
yeah.
cool because the way that he starts talking, the way that David Bowie starts talking is basically all he's saying is, "Listen, I can do this. I can make this machine." Because he's like, the first time I changed the world, they herald me as a revolutionary, and
Mhm.
everybody was happy. But then the next time I tried to do it, they told me to retire. And so he's basically like, "Listen, I can do this, but do you really want to do this?"
And we in the audience at this point, if it's your first time seeing the movie, you still don't know what it is
Yeah,
he's asking him to build, but
exactly.
Tesla does.
Yeah,
Tesla knows what he's been asked to build, and so he's like, "I can do it, but are you sure you're ready for the
yeah,
possible ramifications
yeah.
of what this could mean?"
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a really
Mhm.
great scene, and
Yeah.
again, it's short, but man, David Bowie, he really makes he makes an impact.
And it also really, I mean, man, it as in the audience, it piques your interest again because
Yes.
you're like, "What are we talking about here?"
Yeah,
And then I think we go to
yeah. We
finding
go
it we go
yeah,
back in time
yeah, we
and
go back, and this is when he has a scene with Scarlett Johansson. She's living
mhm,
in the theater, and this is when she's like they really kind of, like, fall in love in this scene, like,
mhm,
she's like, "Cutter keeps thinking you'll just give this up," and Hugh Jackman gets really mad. He's like, "Why would I give it up? I lost my wife and he lost a couple fingers. Like, why?
yeah,
How is that fair?" And then she helps him, and she's like, "Well, you got to do this. Like, let me help you with your makeup again because she's a really good performer."
mhm.
And then he goes and he sees the transported man.
And I love the way that the
Oh,
transported man is first presented to us. I
yeah,
love that
yep,
we don't see it. We see Michael Caine's face. So
yeah.
he does the transported man, and we see Cutter in the audience watching it. And you also hear that the audience doesn't really go wild.
There's like a
They're
few claps.
There's, like, a few claps, but, like,
Yeah,
then it comes back to, them talking about it, And he's like, well, he's not selling it very well. He's like,
Well, and right
yeah,
before this, Hugh Jackman says, "This was the greatest magic trick I've ever seen."
it's the greatest magic trick I've
This
ever seen.
gives him
Yep.
his new pretty much his new resolve. He
Yep.
wanted to find out what the knot was before. Now
Hmm.
he just wants to steal his trick and
Right.
figure out how he does it. So he
Yeah.
says, "It's the greatest magic trick I've ever seen." And then we see Michael Caine, which is such a great performance because all he does is kind of like smirks,
Uh
like,
huh.
"Oh, that's a good one. That's a good
Yeah.
one." But
Yeah.
he knows immediately because the
Yeah.
next scene they're talking about it. And this is
Hmm.
what I love. Again, the heavy-handedness of the script, of the screenplay. Cutter is like, I know how he does it. He uses a double. And Hugh Jackman says, "No, this is a complicated illusion. Like it's not just that simple." And he's like, "Well, it's a double." And then Scarlett Johansson says, "No, it's the same man." She says, "I can see the padded gloves. It's the same man."
Yeah, he
So
wears
if you're
padded gloves where
to
his 2
hide his
fingers are missing, but the same. Yeah, and so they're having this back and forth of, like, the same man comes out of that second
yeah,
door,
yeah,
and Cutter, yeah, from the jump, Cutter's just like, "It's a double.
yeah.
That's
He
that's how
knows.
you that's how you do that trick."
Yeah.
And again, we in the audience, like, he's telling us the answer,
Yeah.
and we're just like, "Okay, but if it's the same guy, if the same
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
Scarlett Johansson's saying that the same guy is coming out."
Exactly.
And
So
we've
we have
already been presented with Nikola Tesla, who's been
Yep,
saying, like, "We can do something really crazy
yep,
here,"
yeah.
so yeah.
And
So
so you and you so this is what's so brilliant is because you have 2 people that are saying it's not a double.
mhm,
And we want to believe it's true. We want
mhm.
to believe it, right?
We
Because
want to believe that it's the fantastical
exactly,
option,
we
that
do. That it's
Tesla
not
has
simple.
done, yeah, that it's not
And
simple and Tesla has done
yeah.
some crazy thing or the yeah,
Exactly.
uh-huh,
He's
yeah,
found out how to
yeah,
clone himself or transport himself or whatever. And we believe it because we see Hugh Jackman as a protagonist
yeah,
and we want him to be right. And
right,
then you also have this other person who says, "No, it's the same man." So
mhm,
we're immediately thinking, well, Cutter doesn't know what he's talking about, right? So like it's so brilliant that they did it this way. And
right.
then he's like, "Well, we've got to steal this trick." And Cutter's like, "Well, the only way I could do it is if we find a double."
Yeah, I don't know
And
how to do it any other way.
yeah.
It's the only
Yep.
way to do it. So they decide to find a double, but like make it, they're gonna dress it up and make it better. Cause he's like, you can sell the trick better. And I don't care if we're doing it the same way he's doing it or not. The point is just do it better.
Yep.
Just steal the
Yeah.
trick and do it
Yeah.
better. And so they
Yep.
go and they find Hugh Jackman a
Oh, yeah.
double and
Because
yeah.
they well,
And,
and it is funny because they do say he says, you know, he's a horrible magician. Hugh Jackman says he's a horrible magician. And he says, "No, he's an amazing magician. He's a horrible performer."
right.
And
Yeah.
that's again comes back later with why Bad Borden loves Scarlett Johansson,
Right.
which we'll talk. But basically, she
Right.
makes him a better performer,
Right.
and he's so obsessed with being a good magician and
Mhm.
performer. That's why he loves her. Anyway,
Yeah.
sorry, I jumped ahead of myself, but yeah,
Yeah.
they go. We do actually see good Borden buy them a house. He says that
Uh-huh.
his magic trick is taking off,
Mhm.
and that's a good scene. But then they find Gerald Root, who is Hugh Jackman, just with a British accent, and
It's a great
I love this
it's a
character.
great performance.
Oh, I love it.
This and it's like they've done, like, some prosthetics on Hugh
Yeah,
Jackman with, like, some false teeth and, like, a little bit of a different nose, but it's very
and he does
clearly
have
yeah.
earlobes. I saw a
Yeah,
video that like they
yeah,
put earlobes on him.
they've done, like,
Yeah,
some really,
to make him
like,
look just different enough.
just different enough, but you can tell that it's Hugh Jackman playing this other
Yeah,
character. But obviously, it's like it needs to be a guy who looks
yeah,
very, very similar to Hugh Jackman. And
yeah,
so they come up with their own version of the transported man. That's
yeah,
just it's a lot. It's sold a lot better. It's
yeah.
dressed up a lot better.
Yeah.
And
Well, and this is
yeah,
funny. This is something I noticed on this rewatch just barely right before we were
mhm,
recording this. He says he's like, "Oh, give me a week and I can make him your brother." And
yeah.
he says, "I don't need him to be my brother. I need him to be me."
Ah, great
And he
line.
says, "Give me a month." And I was like, "Oh, it's he does need him to be his brother. He's got a brother."
I
Anyway,
don't
that was
need him to
just
be
like
my brother. I need him to be me. And it's like little do you
like
know
the
what you what
brother.
what you do need is a twin brother.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
and you
just a
don't
cool little detail.
and you don't have one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's awesome. Yeah, then they do this show. We
Yeah.
see, they've got this kind of fun mechanism of how they're doing the trick. Um, you know, Borden comes to watch his act. He can
Yeah.
see immediately that Hugh Jackman's not doing the trick
Yeah.
the right
He
way.
Yeah,
Like,
he
yeah.
can tell exactly what's happening.
Well, but what's weird is Borden, it's like Hugh Jackman's doing the trick the same way,
Yeah,
Borden does it. He's just doing it with a guy that's not identical to him,
exactly.
so it's like the
Yeah,
magic's not as impressive.
yeah.
Like, it's just not,
Yeah, and actually
yeah,
the it is so funny though because the way that Hugh Jackman does his trick is so much more
flashy.
theatrical, and
Yeah,
it's so much better
yeah,
because Gordon just, like, bounces the ball, right? And
mhm,
it is cool, it's a cool way to do it. He
yeah,
figures it out, and it's a huge hit, and then but the really cool part about this sequence is that Borden has to take his bows under the stage.
mhm,
Or I'm sorry, Angier has to take his bows
Angier.
under the stage.
Yeah,
Yeah, Hugh
mhm,
Jackman. And he, like, bows every night, and, right, he, like but that's in the end, that comes back, like, he really does want that
mhm,
attention. He
yeah,
wants that bow. He
yeah,
doesn't get it. He
yeah,
never really gets it. But anyway, it's really cool. He's under the stage
yeah,
and the
and this
show
is
is
yeah,
really taking off.
this whole section of the movie, so we've like the whole first half is like the pledge, where we're
Yeah.
just sort of being introduced to the
Yep.
characters and sort of like the pieces. This is all the turn when we're
Yeah.
starting to
Yep.
like learn their trick. That it's like, okay, this the trick that's in
Yep.
question is this transported man, this
Yeah.
like this
Pretty
kind
much.
of teleportation trick.
Yep.
Um, and the prestige of the film is like how each man eventually does
Yeah, the trick.
the trick.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, and so the show is going really well, but then at this point, Hugh Jackman tells Scarlett Johansson, "You need to go work for him." And she's
Mhm.
like, "Why would I work for him?" He's like, "Well, we need to figure out how the trick is really done." He's like, "Just think about it. How if we had the real transported man, right? Like the if we had the real trick, what we could do." And you could tell that Scarlett Johansson's pretty pissed. Like
Mhm.
she doesn't like it. But he's like, you're gonna spy on him and you're gonna tell him the truth. And he like tries to kiss her and she pulls away.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they're trying to figure it out, or she basically does go to
Yeah, he says, "Tell him the truth. Tell him I sent you to him and that you're mad about it, and and tell him my secret and that you want to work for him." Yeah.
yeah,
So she goes to do that,
yeah,
and
and
get
she tells him, the truth, and he tells her how he does it. He's
right, right. Well, he's like, "Oh, what could his secret possibly be?"
yeah,
Somehow he walks through one door and he emerges from the other one slightly overweight and
and
if I'm not
completely drunk.
mistaken, completely drunk. And he's like, "It's amazing. How does he do it?" Like
Yeah,
he's, you know,
yeah, it's pretty great. And she's like, "Well, he told me to tell you the truth." And he's like, "Oh, is that the truth?" And she's kind of looking at him, and then the scene cuts,
yeah, 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 yeah.
which is great. And then it goes back to the performance. Hugh Jackman falls, and or we see that Root is basically caught on. He's like,
Yeah.
"We need to have a little chat." Right? He
Yeah,
tells him,
he
and he's like,
understands that he has leverage and that he's like, "You guys need to pay me more or I'm
"Yeah,
going to reveal that I'm your
yeah,
double on stage." And so and Michael Caine's like, "Man, usually it takes him longer to figure it out. I don't know how he figured it out." And then
yeah,
we do see that that I mean, Root's an alcoholic, and we see that while he is at a bar one night, Borden approaches him
yeah."
and basically explains to like without it's a really cleverly written scene
It
where
is, yeah,
he just sort of it like incepts the idea
yeah,
into his head, you should
yeah. He did.
blackmail
Yeah, he's like, "Well,
Algier.
I did the trick, but I used a double." And
Yeah.
he's like, "Oh, very interesting." Like,
Yeah, and then he's like,
he's
"But
like,
this bloke, he had complete power over me, so,
"Yeah, yeah." He's like,
eh,
"So," and he's like, "Oh, okay." And
yeah,
he gets the idea. It's a really good scene.
yeah.
So then the next performance, he falls through the trap door and there's no bag there. So
No,
he
that's this the next one is he falls through, but Root is like
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. He
is
Root's
sitting there,
there
yeah,
and like
and he's like messing with him,
yeah,
and yeah,
you're right. Yeah.
yeah,
And so he's like
yeah.
and then
But then we get to, yeah, he falls through eventually, and there's
yeah,
no bag there. That's how he breaks
that's
his leg, and
yeah.
he sees Borden, which I think is bad Borden, because he's quite
Yeah,
the
that's what
showman.
I
He's
think it
quite
is
the
too.
showman in the scene,
Yeah.
and bad Borden is under the stage, and he kind of salutes to him, and he pops up. So in this version of the
Yeah.
transported man, Algier goes through the trapdoor, and Borden comes out, catches the
Uh-huh.
hat, and goes, "Oh, the great
The
Danton,"
great Danton.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and then, Root is lowered from the
the
rafters,
ceiling. Yeah.
with a sign on that says, like, it's advertising Borden
His
show
Yeah,
across
he's
the
like
street. Yeah.
yeah. And
there simply is too much magic here for me,
yeah,
for my show across the stage at the
yeah.
across the street at the
At
Pantages.
the Pantages, yeah,
Yeah.
and you see Fallon in the audience,
Yep.
and Fallon is laughing.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
laughing, so
But you can also see this like thing when Fallon's watching him that it's like it's his brother who's more mild mannered, being like,
yeah,
my brother Freddie, like doing his
yeah,
thing,
yeah,
like
like,
being like,
okay,
being
yeah,
a,
yeah,
and
so
yeah.
that's great, and then, he goes so Borden or sorry, Angier goes
Mhm,
and he confronts Scarlett Johansson, and he's like he basically knows that she's fallen in love with him,
mhm.
and she's like, "Well, I got his diary." And he's like, "Well, he's like, there's a cipher. I can't, do this." She's like, "Well, I have to have it back to him. Like if I don't get it back to him, he's going to know that you took it." And he's like, "Well, I'll stage a break-in." But he can tell that Scarlett Johansson has fallen in love
Yeah.
with Freddie,
Yeah, we also learn
Bad
there's like
Borden.
there's a nice moment here where like we see kind of like the toll of obsession, that this started out as like revenge for his dead wife.
It does. Yep.
And then she's kind of saying something like, how is this going to how is this going
Yeah.
to
How's this
bring
going to
back.
bring back your wife?
And he says, I don't care about my wife, I care about his secret. And
Yeah.
it's this really kind of like emotionally potent moment
Cuz yeah,
where.
he sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but I think that's another big theme in this movie is it's that same thing that, Tesla is saying to him, like, "Have you considered the cost?" And it's like,
Yeah.
this cost of this feud that you're obsessed with, this rivalry, this hatred, and also this obsession with becoming the best at something, it
Yeah.
can cost you relationships and,
Mhm.
kind of your own moral decency, and
Yeah.
yeah, this whole kind of theme of getting your hands dirty.
Yeah,
Um,
and I love the perform Hugh Jackman does an amazing job as well.
yeah.
We haven't said that because Christian Bale does really amazing. Hugh
Yeah.
Jackman also does amazing,
Oh,
and
yeah.
he's really funny when he plays Root, right? But
Yeah, yeah.
when he does say, he says, "I don't care about my wife. I care about a secret." He like
Mhm,
stops himself
mhm,
and he realizes what he just said,
mhm.
but he carries on with it. Like,
Yeah,
okay, that like this is
yeah,
kind of the moment where he really starts to kind of become the antagonist.
yeah, absolutely.
Like,
He's
because
yeah,
it really like he becomes the bad guy.
yeah.
There's not many movies that can make a protagonist become an antagonist
But that's
the
the
way that
interesting
it does.
the first time I saw this movie, you think of Borden as the bad
Oh,
guy
yeah, yeah.
and Algier as the good guy for the first
Well,
half of the movie.
and
And again,
also
yeah,
s
the turn of the
yeah,
film is like in the middle of the movie, they switch roles.
yeah, and
Yeah,
at this point, this is when, Borden falls in love with Scarlett Johansson, and so
right.
you think but it really is Freddie. Freddie is really falling in love with Olivia,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
which makes it even more sad
yeah.
because they have this little sequence where, like, he's like, "I really do love her." Like,
Mhm.
and he's they're kissing and, like, he really does love her. He doesn't love Sarah, he loves her.
Yeah.
But we as the audience on the first watch are thinking, "What a jerk." Like, this guy is,
Yeah,
like, a
totally.
creep.
Well, there's so many things that were given in the first half of the film, like,
Yeah.
we think he killed, Hugh
Yeah.
Jackman's character,
Mhm.
that this is where this feud led to. It boiled to a point
Yes.
where he murdered him.
Yes.
We also like, we have all these reasons to suspect that, like, he's the more malevolent of the 2 magicians, but
Yeah.
we don't have all the information, and really at this point, though, Hugh Jackman's character starts to become more and more dark, and he's
Yes.
and it's also sort of like the story is like, well, maybe he's just willing to get his hands dirty now, because we do this whole
Yeah.
sequence where he they kind of trick Fallon into,
Yeah, that's
uh
right after this,
yeah,
yeah.
right after this, and there's this great it's like kind of this like little chase sequence where Hugh Jackman misdirects Fallon down an
Yeah.
alleyway, and Fallon follows him up because
This is
he just
good
did the
Borden.
yeah, and
Yeah, who's playing Fallon, yeah.
right, and he just did the break-in, so they're trying to get after, Hugh Jackman,
Yeah.
and, Fallon falls through the stairs, which is good Borden, and he falls
Yep.
into a
A
coffin,
coffin.
and
Yeah.
this is, like, gnarly that Michael Caine and Algier nail him into a coffin and then
Yeah.
bury him alive,
They do, yep.
and tell bad, uh
Borden.
Borden, "Here's where you can find him,"
Yeah.
or, like, "You can meet us." So Bad Borden shows up, out in the woods, finally, he's like, "I guess you're finally getting your hands dirty,"
Yeah,
you
I like
know,
that,
and
yep.
he says, "Write down your secret, Mr. Borden, and we can call it, here." Borden writes down one word, and he goes, "Not the cipher, your
Yeah.
trick." And the trick, the whole trick, and he goes, "The cipher is the
The
secret to the trick."
yeah, the
And
keyword is my
yeah,
method,
the
yeah.
or the keyword to the cipher is my method, and the keyword is Tesla.
Yeah.
And so what he's telling him is Nikola Tesla built me a magic machine.
Machine. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
and so
exactly what he wants him to
and
believe.
that's
Yep.
the misdirect. And
Yeah.
so then Hugh Jackman tells him, "I buried Fallon in the ground. How fast can you dig?"
Yeah. And
And he
he's like,
real
"Fallon! Fallon, can you hear me?"
Yeah, yeah.
It's like
And
you
it's
can tell
like,
he's genuinely scared
yeah, of
because it's
course,
his
because
brother.
it's his brother, and it's also the
It's his
key
whole
to both of their
livelihood.
it's their yeah, it's everything. So so yeah, anyway, I love the next scene that we see these 2 brothers in because
Yeah.
like the way that they show up at this restaurant and Bad Borden is like drunk and angry and pissed and he
Yep.
had like a terrible day
Yep.
and and he
His
brings Olivia with him. He just brings his
yeah.
mistress with him
And
to
it is pretty crazy because his voice is hoarse, which I think is cool. But then
Mhm,
he sits closer to Olivia. So
mhm,
Bad Borden sits closer to Olivia. And then Fallon, who is good Borden, sits closer to
to
Sarah.
Sarah. Yep.
And it's kind of like this cool little way that they block the scene. But yeah,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
and you get Freddie, Bad Borden is really upset. And he's like, but Sarah tells, she knows like you brought Olivia.
Mhm.
And she's like, "Can Mr. Fallon, can you please escort Olivia back home?" So then Good Borden and Olivia leave. So it's just Bad Borden and Sarah, and they get in a fight.
Yeah.
And she tells him, like, "You need to tell me like what your secret is." And he's like, "I can't I think this is when she first says, I can't live like this."
Yeah.
And he
And he
says, "Well,
says, "Sarah,
secret."
you can't." Yeah, yeah, but secrets are my life, you know?
Yeah.
And then she goes, Do you love me?" And he says, "Not today." Yeah.
No, no, not
Oh,
that
no,
part.
that's later,
That's
yeah.
later. That's
That's
later.
later, that's right, yeah.
Yeah, because they get in a fight and she's just upset. So,
Yeah.
and you see her start drinking, like she starts drinking a
Right,
lot more,
right, right, right.
and so it just kind of sets up her demise, unfortunately. So,
Yeah.
then we
Yeah.
go, yeah,
We're
and
back in Colorado after this, right?
yeah, and
Yeah,
I do
we're
have to say, Rebecca Hall, she's awesome in this movie as well.
Rebecca Hall's everyone's great in
Oh,
this
she's
movie. Rebecca
so
Hall's
good.
fantastic in this movie. But yeah, we're back in Colorado.
Yeah.
Uh, Tesla has finished the machine for Algier,
Well, no,
and
and well, I guess this is
because before the Edison guys come in and blow up the laboratory, he finishes the machine, right?
right. Well, he
Yeah,
goes. So Edison's men arrive, but
right.
then we see this is when Algier finds the diary, and he finds out that this is when Olivia betrayed him.
Right, yeah.
So
This is a
he's
great turn too. Yeah, he's
yeah,
reading the diary and he realizes that the whole thing, the whole Tesla,
yep,
keyword to the cipher, it was all a trick. The
it
diary
was
was
all fake.
fake. It was all fake and
Yeah, and
Freddie
Olivia betrayed him.
uh-huh. Yep, and we go back to the scene where
Yes,
Freddie said to her, "So this is the truth, is it?" And then she goes, "No, this is what he told me to tell you."
yeah,
And then she goes, "Actually, I hate him. I'm mad that," and we find out she helped him,
yeah. She
she
found
helped
Root. She
yeah,
helped him to find Root,
helped him to
and
find Root. Yeah.
and we see kind of their relationship. And this was a little detail that I thought was cool because she tells him in this scene, she's like, "You're hiding your biggest strength, which is your fingers."
Yeah.
She's like, "You need to show them off because it's really hard to do those tricks." And he's like, "Yeah, it really is hard."
Yeah.
And they really do start to love each other. And
Mhm.
after this scene, he doesn't wear gloves anymore.
Yeah.
So on
Which
stage, he
is
always wore gloves,
which
but he doesn't anymore.
she's right. It's like
She
the
is.
thing that will make the trick more impressive is that a man missing 2 fingers is
Yeah.
coming out of the other door. It's
Yeah.
like let people see that so that
Yeah.
they know it's not a double, so that they
Yeah.
know, you know,
Yeah.
yeah, so that's pretty cool. That's a cool little moment. But
Yeah.
yeah, now Algier is like, "Oh crap. I just paid Tesla a bunch of money and
Yeah.
he didn't build
Mhm.
Borden a magic machine." So he runs up to the laboratory
Yeah, and
and
he's all mad.
he's all mad. He's like, "Tesla, what are you doing with my money?" And
Yeah.
Tesla
Yeah.
goes, "Hey, the machine works. It's finished. We can do it." So he takes his hat. He takes Mr. Algier's hat, his top
No,
hat.
no, he takes the cat. This is when he puts the cat
Oh,
in.
right.
So
Yeah.
Tesla's like, "We have to try it. We can't. We have to try it on something else to see if it works."
Yeah.
And so he puts the cat in,
Uh-huh.
and they do the machine, and the
Well,
machine
but he's
goes.
done it with his hat before.
He
He's
has
tried
they've
it.
been yeah, we
Yeah.
forgot that scene. He went and
Yeah.
he's like, "It's not working." So it
Right.
kinda made him upset, but this time he's really mad.
Yeah.
Algier is really
Yeah.
mad, and
Yeah.
they try it on the cat, nothing happens. He leaves and he's like, "Well, I hope with whatever you did with my money was worth it."
Yeah.
He's walking out, and this is when he sees the cat
It's
and
these 2
all the
cats
hats.
sees 2 cats fighting with each other,
Yeah.
and they're clone cats of each other, and then
Yes.
we see
Yeah.
the first shot of the movie, which is all these hats lying, and
Yep.
this is the very first shot of the movie that we're so what we learn is that the machine was working. It was
Yep.
instead of teleporting the cat or the
Yes.
hat, it was
Cloning.
cloning it and sending the clone like 100 yards away.
Yeah.
And so there's this great line. This line is so good where he understands that the machine works now, and he goes, also, I would just if my recommendation would be don't use this machine again. Don't use this
Yeah.
machine. But then he's leaving and he goes, don't forget your hat. And he goes, which one's my hat? And Tesla says, they're all your hat, Mr.
Yeah.
Angier. And that's
Pretty
such an
cool.
important line
Yeah.
because when he says, am I the man in the box or the man up there? It's you're both
Yep.
of them. You're
Yep.
both of those men. They're both you.
Yeah.
And yeah, and so that it's
Makes it
like,
pretty crazy.
yeah,
Yeah.
mhm,
So yeah, we cut back to Borden, and this is good. Borden, he's with his daughter. She's like, "Can we go to the zoo?" And he's like, "Oh, I can't." And he's like, "But you told me you'd take me to the zoo yesterday." He's like, "Okay, then we'll go to the zoo." And you could tell that Sarah's really upset.
mhm,
And he's like, "The only person that is competing for my affection is our daughter."
mhm.
And she's like, "Well, you mean it, which makes it so hard."
When you
So
don't.
yeah, so
It's the inverse of what
it's
she
the
said
inverse.
earlier. Yeah.
Yeah, which I
Mhm.
love, which is really,
Yeah.
really great
Yeah.
little thing, and so
Yeah.
it's really hard for her, you can tell.
Mhm.
And, so then he goes and talks to Fallon. Couple things I noticed on this one.
Mhm.
So he talks to Fallon. He's like, "The little girl wants to go to the zoo." He's like, "Right." He's like, "If you could take her, that'd be great." So they obviously just switch off with their daughter,
Sure.
and, but then he says, he's like, "She knows."
Yeah.
And he's like, we as the audience, if you have never seen this, are thinking, "Oh, she knows about the affair.
Yeah.
She knows about the affair." But no, he's like, "She knows. She's catching on to the fact that we are twins."
This was one of the points that I paused it and I looked at my girlfriend and I said, "Any thoughts?" And she goes,
Yeah.
"Nope, I got nothing." And I was like, "Okay." I'm like, "Yeah," because like literally, like he's talking to
Yep. Yep.
again the weirdest character ever, Fallon,
Yeah.
who just like barely speaks and looks so
Yeah.
weird every time we see his face. And he's like, "Sarah knows. She knows
Yeah.
that there's something weird
He's
going
like,
on."
and he
And
says,
yeah,
if you could help me with that, I'd really appreciate it.
yeah.
Telling him like, please, but
Please
the at
try to
the
do a better job pretending
yeah.
to love my wife.
Yeah,
Yeah.
at the very yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
At the very beginning of the scene, Fallon does speak. You
Yeah.
don't see him speak, but he says, "Oh, she really likes to use the money, doesn't she?" He says
Yeah.
something like that, like, "She's
Mhm.
really wringing us out of the money."
Yeah.
And you can tell it's bad
Which is a
Borden.
very, very Freddy thing to say, yeah.
Yep, it's
Mhm.
bad
Bad
Borden, and
blood.
he's
Mhm.
saying, like, she just likes to spend our money. He really doesn't like Sarah,
Yeah,
which is I mean, it's a jerk thing to do.
sure.
Either way. But anyway, so that whole scene is, like, amazing.
Yeah.
It's so great. So then good Borden goes and talks to Olivia,
Mhm.
and she tries to kiss him, and he's like, "Don't," she's like, "Hey, Freddie," and he's like, just don't call me that." He's like, "It doesn't
A
feel right
and again,
because it's
he
not."
literally says, he's like, "Some days I don't feel like being called Freddy. Some day."
Yeah,
And it's like, this movie's just being so, like, clear that
yeah,
here's a guy who some days when he tells his wife he loves
yeah,
her, she believes him, some days she doesn't. Some days when he's with his mistress, he doesn't wanna be called by the name that she calls him, and some day like,
yeah,
it's
yep.
just yeah, it's so cool.
It's crazy.
Uh-huh.
So they kind of have this fight, and he's like, "Well, just." He kind of just tells her to stay away. I don't even remember what he says, but basically, like, you know,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
not working, or
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and she's like, "Leave your family at home." So,
Yeah.
and this was awesome. This was the awesome thing in the scene. At the end of the scene, I guess he doesn't really break up with her, but he's just kind of like, "We'll just lay off."
Yeah.
And she's like, "I've seen that man Fallon walking around, and
Yeah.
he just gives me the creeps." And he says, "Well, do you trust me?" And she says, "Yeah." He says, "Well, if you trust me, then you trust Fallon."
Yep.
And I was like, "Oh, that's so like
Yeah, if you trust me, you trust Fallon. He protects the things that matter
things that
most
I
to me.
care." Yep. And
Yeah.
it's like,
Mhm.
wow. And
Yeah.
again, like, you're just like, why does
And
this guy
again,
love
the
Fallon? Like,
this movie is telling you, like, Fallon is a very
yeah.
important character the whole movie,
Hmm.
and if he is so important, we should know more about him. We should,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
and so I think that you just sort of it's crazy how
Yeah.
much this movie is just right in your face with it the whole time.
Yep.
Um,
And
but
then
yeah, now yeah.
we go back to Colorado.
Mhm.
Tesla's compound has been burned down.
Uh-huh.
And he's like, I didn't see it necessary to tell the men about the
The
box. And
box,
he's
yeah.
like, yeah,
Yeah,
he's
and
like,
Tesla leaves Algier, the machine, and he also leaves
yeah,
him a note that says, "My recommendation for this machine: bury it in the bottom of the deepest ocean.
yeah,
Just don't use it, man.
yeah,
But it's yours. You paid for it,
yep,
so you can do whatever you want with it." And
yep.
now we go, Algier,
Well,
basically,
yeah, and
yeah.
this is good. So this is when we go back to when Borden is in jail. Bad
Mhm,
Borden is in jail, and he reads the diary, and
mhm,
this is when Angier tells him, he said, "This is where I leave you at the turn." He's like,
mhm.
"While you're in jail, rotting for my murder."
Yeah.
And Borden is like, it's just like he's
Yeah, he's
like
been
what?
reading this journal, and then he
Yeah,
gets to this point, and it's like, well, how could he have possibly known
yeah,
that I was gonna get tried for his murder? And
yeah.
so that's the this
And
turn
this
here.
is yeah, this
Yeah,
is really pretty much the 3rd act. We're getting into the 3rd act
yep,
now because everything's gonna be resolved. So this
yep.
is pretty much getting into the prestige of the movie,
Yeah,
right?
and now Algier is going to do the real transported man. He's going to do this limited engagement.
Yep,
He gets Cutter back on board, but he says, "I don't want you front of house this time." He's got blind stagehands to be
yeah.
backstage, and like he
Well,
gets
and
this.
yeah, and actually, so okay, so even before this, sorry, I've gotta go
Mhm,
back because this is actually really important 'cause, um, Borden tells the guy, like, "Here's my tricks, but I'll give you the prestige of all my tricks when you bring me my daughter. I want to see her again."
yeah.
And he says, "Okay." But then we flash back to, when Sarah and Bad Borden are having
Have
a
a
fight.
Yeah, this is important. Sarah and Bad Borden have a
Yeah.
big fight, and, and Bad Borden he's been asked by his brother to try to help, he doesn't.
Yes.
He drops
He
the ball in a big way.
he really
He
does.
tells her he doesn't love her, and then the
Well,
next
and this is like she's like, "Do you love me?" And he says, "No,
not today. He
not
says,
today."
"Not yeah, not
And
today,"
that
yeah.
performance was like, oh, it's like so gut-wrenching because
It's
like
gut-wrenching, yeah,
it
and it
really
and
and she
then
says, "I know what you are,"
yeah.
which again, like, you
And then, what happens shortly thereafter is Sarah goes to their workshop
yeah,
and she hangs herself.
yeah,
And this is also important. There's all these things like
yeah,
the way that Algier's wife was strung up with ropes when the way that
yeah,
she would hang as a part of their trick. And then also the fact that Borden Bad Borden dies by
yeah,
hanging. He's
yeah,
hung
yep,
for his crime.
pretty
And
yeah.
and the way that Algier's wife died, Algier is
Angier, sorry. I think I
Angier,
keep saying Algier, but
Ang
Angier.
Angier the way that Angier's
Yeah,
wife dies is also the way that the fate that he meets,
that's right. Yeah.
100 times,
It's pretty
Uh,
crazy,
yeah,
yeah.
so
So, yeah, they have this limited engagement, and he's like he comes back with the machine, Angier comes back with his machine, Cutter, he has him help him. He gets, like, the guy that they talked about at the beginning of the movie to promote, and he's like
great
he
scene.
yeah,
Fantastic scene where he demonstrates the trick
yeah.
for the guy.
Well, and
Yeah,
this guy knows it's magic.
yeah.
This guy's like, "Oh, you gotta give him some reason to doubt."
Yeah, so
And
he shows him the trick, and the trick is amazing. I mean, it's like he walks into this Tesla machine that's sprouting electricity, he disappears, and then he reemerges in the balcony of the theater, and
yeah,
it's not a double, it's the exact same man, and
yeah,
the
yep,
promoter with all the money goes, "Pardon me, it's
yeah,
very rare to see real magic."
yeah,
And then he goes, "You're gonna have to dress it up a bit and give the
yeah,
audience some reason to doubt it because people will freak out if they."
yeah,
Yeah, and so
yep.
I even think that, like, he makes his trap door a little visible just so that people can
Yes.
go, "Okay,
Well,
yeah, yeah,
I think he does it as a way to lure, Borden.
Borden in." Yeah,
'Cause he's
absolutely.
like right, so
Mhm,
after this part, after he shows him, then we cut to Bad Borden and Scarlett Johansson's Olivia talking, and they break up, and
mhm,
he's sincere, he's like, "I really did love you, like, I
mhm.
love you, I never loved Sarah."
Yeah,
And she's like, she basically says, "What's wrong?" Like, "It's inhuman for someone to act so cold," is what
right,
she says.
right.
And so she breaks up with him. She's like, "You really deserve each other. He's back.
Mhm,
Angier is back." Right?
yep.
So, and then she leaves, and so he's pretty
And
much alone.
And this is a great sequence too because we really switch parts now. For
Yeah.
so long in the movie, Angier was obsessed with how Borden does the transported man. Like he
Yes.
just how does he do that? The same man walks out of the door,
Yeah.
and now Borden is going to this theater and watching this trick and going, I just don't get it. I can
Yeah.
see the trap door. I see that he's
Yep.
going through a trap door, but how is he emerging on the other side? That doesn't make any sense. And
No.
so there's these great shots
Yeah.
where Borden is talking to Fallon and going,
Why can't you outthink him?
what 50 meters in a second,
Yeah.
where does he go when he goes through that trap door? Why? and
Yeah.
and it's so great too because Fallon's not responding, like, but it's like,
Yeah.
why can't you outthink him? And I love
Yeah.
this because this is bad Borden, I think,
Yeah.
yelling and
Is
who's
a bad Borden
obsessed.
is yelling at him. Yeah.
And then level-headed Borden says, "We'll leave it alone. We'll leave
Yep.
it alone. Look, we're
He
not
says,
going
"We're
back.
done."
We're done. We're not going back. We'll just leave it alone. We'll leave him to his trick." And
Yep.
then bad Borden can't help it,
Yep.
and he has to go back one more time, and just like he did with, like, going up on stage with the disappearing bird trick, he goes up on stage as a volunteer, and he's like, "I'm gonna in a disguise," and he's gonna
Yep.
sneak backstage and figure out what's going on, and this is where we're back to the beginning of the movie. We're at
Mhm.
the end of the movie, but we're also back to where we started, which is he goes down there and he finds out that
Yep.
Angier drops into a tank of water, and
Yeah.
we as the audience still think like this is
What's
different
going
than what
on?
because he Angier does not reappear in this
No.
version of the
Which
trick.
yeah, which means he probably saw him on
Yeah,
come up on stage, which is a
uh-huh,
pretty cool detail that I've never really, he sees
right.
because he has to know when he's there.
Because he's
So
doing the trick the same way every night, and
exactly.
s and, he's
Yeah.
always killing himself in a tank
Yes,
of water every
he
single
is.
night, but
Yeah.
he has to wait for Borden to take the bait to not
Yeah.
reappear and
Yeah.
let the audience think, "Oh, he died," Borden put a tank of water, but yeah,
Yeah.
and we still don't know as the audience that that's the actual prestige, is
Yeah,
that
we don't know yet.
Angier has been dropping his clone through a trap or dropping himself through a
Yeah.
trap door and
Yeah, and he got
drowning
caught.
himself in a tank,
Yeah.
and then his clone emerges, but it's like, it's such a trip because it
Mhm.
is like, which one is you? Which one,
Yeah. Yeah.
like, if
S Yeah,
yeah,
it really, like, after you really think about it, which I'm actually my son figured out, like, "Oh, I think he drops his clone in, and he kills his
yeah,
clone every night." I was like, "Oh,
yeah,
good job, dude. That was really good."
yeah,
It is pretty crazy to think about it. But
yeah,
basically, he knows he's died. Cutter identifies him as dead, right? The
mhm.
one and
We
then
see Angier on a slab dead.
yes, we
It's
see
us in
him
the
dead.
audience, like, he's dead,
He is
and
dead.
yeah,
And then, there's a
Lord
meeting
Call
between well, yeah,
yeah.
there's a meeting
Oh, yeah.
between Owens, the solicitor, and Cutter, and he's
Mhm.
like, "Can I meet?" He's like, "I wanna buy this machine."
Right.
And he's like, "Well, that's the Lord Caldlow really wants it." He's like, "Well, can I meet with Lord Caldlow?" And he's like, "Well, that's out of the question." He's like, "But if run into him while you're delivering everything, I can't prevent that."
Yeah.
Which is
Yeah, so
great
yeah, and
because
Cutter
it's
goes
like
to the yeah,
so c
and
yeah.
and this is our first kind of big, huge, like, in the 3rd act, like, big reveal is,
Well,
like
yeah, and so
yeah,
we have that scene, but then we go to
the prison.
Borden. We go to the
Yeah.
prison, yep,
Mhm.
and he sees his daughter,
Yep, and
and
he, he's giving like, Lord Caldlow's there with the daughter. He doesn't look at who
no, he
Lord
doesn't.
Caldlow is.
He's just looking at his
He's
daughter.
just fixated on his daughter. He's just
Yeah,
excited to see her,
yep.
and, he's doing little tricks with the magic red ball, and then he stands up to hand the prestige over to Lord Caldlow, and
It's
it's Angier,
Angier.
and it's Hugh Jackman,
Yep.
and he just immediately is like, "This is impossible. Like,
Yeah,
I watched you die. I
yeah,
watched you die in a
and
tank,
he says,
you
"You're
know,
you're definitely not afraid to get your hands dirty."
yeah, whatever you've done, I don't know
Yeah,
what you've done, but whatever you've done, it's not good,"
yeah,
and yeah, and
and
so
this is when he says, "I've always been Lord Caldlow."
yeah.
Like, and he's like so they have this exchange,
That's a
and
really cool detail that I actually never caught, is that
yeah,
he was Lord Caldlow the whole time.
yeah,
That's his real identity.
yeah, I
Yeah,
found that out a while ago,
yeah.
after one time when I randomly watched it, but yeah, it
They're
is a really cool detail. That's
yeah.
he's always been Lord Caldlow. He
They're
never
both
really was
men
Robert Angier,
they're both men who are not
pretending
using their actual name. Yeah,
exactly.
and you
And
yeah.
so, yeah, they have this, and he's like, he basically tells him, he's like, "I know what it's like to lose somebody, so you're gonna know. That's why I'm gonna take your daughter."
Mhm.
And I do think he would have actually raised her. But
Mhm.
anyway, it's pretty messed up that he does that.
For sure.
And then Borden is like, here's my trick. Here's my trick. Like you can find out. And he's like, oh, really? So he takes it and he's like, you always were the better magician. He's like, but when it came down to it, my trick was, I think we both agree that my trick was better. So he rips it up and he throws it away. And then he
Yeah.
just takes his daughter and
It's
walks
just
out.
like, I don't care about your secret anymore
Yeah.
because I actually built a teleportation machine with Tesla. So,
Yeah.
like, I think I win. And that's what
Yeah.
he says. He actually says, I win.
I
I
win.
win.
Yeah.
And then he walks away and Borden's yelling at the guards. He's like,
Yeah.
that's the man that I'm meant to have
Yeah.
killed. If
Yeah.
he's a,
If he's
but it's
alive,
like,
I'm innocent. Yeah.
but that's, just sounds like the rantings of like everyone's
Yep.
seen that Angier is dead.
Yeah.
Everyone saw that the great
Yeah.
Danton,
Yeah.
or whoever, whatever his name is dead.
Yeah.
And then now we go to Michael Caine delivering the machine,
Yes. And
finding out,
he
and this is another great moment where it's
oh,
like he's
yeah.
just like, "How is it that you're alive?"
Yeah.
I watched,
And the
you know,
Michael Caine does such an amazing job
yeah,
on this. He's like his face just totally drops, and he can
yeah,
tell, like and yeah, he's like, "I watched you die. Like, how are you still alive?"
and like whatever you've done something bad,
Yeah, he
you've lost
knows.
yourself, yeah,
Yep.
and yeah, and so like it is eventually revealed to him, kind of like, hey, well, I don't have any plans on ever using the machine ever
Yeah.
again,
Yep.
and he kind of goes down, and this is the movie's
Well,
now sort of like hurtling into its
yeah, yeah,
into its finale.
yeah, and we go back to Bad Borden in jail, and he's
Mhm,
talking with Fallon. This
mhm.
is like the most blatant
This is
that
the most
Fallon is here.
this I paused the movie again at this conversation.
You
At the
did.
end of this conversation, I said,
Yeah.
"Do you have any guesses?" I said, "We're just about to get there. Do you have any guesses?" And she said, "Nope, not a one." And I was like,
Yep.
"'Cause this scene where he goes, "I'm sorry about Sarah. I'm sorry
Yeah.
about everything. You were right. I should have just left him to his trick." And it's like, we watched the scene. Christian Bale's the one who
Yep.
says, "Leave him alone. Don't go back to the theater." And then
Yep.
Christian Bale's saying to Fallon, "You were right. I should have left him alone." And
Yeah.
it's like if like
Yeah.
the logic of it is like,
Well,
yeah,
and he
yeah,
says and then he throws him the ball, he says, "You go live your life for the both of us now.
right,
Like, you live a
right,
full life."
for both
Basically,
of us.
yeah, and then he throws him the ball,
Mhm.
and Fallon catches the ball, and he says, "Goodbye."
Mhm.
And then that's the but it's a
And
close up. It's a close up.
it's a
Like a
close
close up
up
for a long time
of this
on his
actor that
face.
like there were like nobody in the world knows who that actor is. Like
No.
nobody's like, "Oh, hey, look, it's Willem Dafoe playing
Yeah.
Fallon," or like,
Yeah.
like nobody knows who that guy is. He's like a
Yeah.
very weird looking guy. Also, the fact that like Christian Bale's Borden's transported man was always bouncing a ball to
Yeah.
himself. And so
Exactly.
he bounces
And
the
he
ball to
catches
him.
it.
Yep.
Yep.
Uh-huh.
And you see he's got gloves on because he's gotta hide it.
Right.
Right.
And
Anyway.
so yeah, so Fallon catches the ball and then Borden is getting kind of walked to
Yep.
the hangman gallows
Yes.
while Angier is showing the basement of the theater to
Yeah.
Michael Caine where they're going to store the machine. And
Yep.
at this point, Michael Caine is aware.
Oh,
He's
he knows.
seen
Well,
he's
and we see
seen
Michael
the
Caine go get the daughter.
yeah,
But
and
yeah, he's seen everything.
he's seen the tanks of dead bodies. And this is such a great little turn here where he says, "I once told you that drowning that a friend of mine who drowned said that it felt like going home.
Well,
I
and he's like,
lied."
he
Yeah,
said so he says, "I told you about my friend who drowned," and Hugh Jackman says, "Oh yeah, he said it was like going home." And
yeah.
then what does he say?
He goes, "I lied." He said it was agony.
Oh, I
And he
love
just
that line so
yeah,
much.
and it's just this thing where he's like, "I was trying to comfort you and be nice, but
Yeah.
just so you know, you've been putting yourself through torture
Yeah.
every single night for 100 shows,"
Yep.
or however many shows they did
Yeah, and
before.
he tells him, he says, "Take this all in,"
Mhm.
and so he walks away. Cutter walks away. He
Yeah.
walks out of the theater. We see somebody walking up, which pretty much it looks like
It's
Fallon because
Fallon,
it is Fallon.
but and
We
he's
see his
dressed as
hair.
Fallon, and Cutter looks at him and, like, acknowledges him,
He
like,
does.
nods to him, like, "Go on in,"
Yeah.
and I
And
think Cutter even knows, like, whatever
oh, he
happens in
knows.
there is none of my business, like,
Yeah, and
yeah.
he knows like it's a twin. So I don't know when Cutter figured out it was a twin.
Mhm.
He obviously knew it was a double,
Yeah,
but whenever it was, it probably was earlier than we all think. But he
probably.
walks out, he walks into the theater. Hugh Jackman is like looking, and we can't see what's in the tanks.
Mhm.
Like he's just looking at it, and then we see it's cut between the two scenes. He's looking, and then we see Bad Borden say abracadabra,
Yeah, he's
and then
got
he
the
gets hung.
hangman's noose around his
Yep,
neck, abracadabra, and as he does that, Angier gets shot.
gets shot.
Yeah, and he falls down
Well,
and
he catches the rubber ball and
yeah,
he's looking at it and then he gets shot.
yeah.
And this is when everything comes out because he's like, we see that it's good Borden
Mhm.
who shot him.
Yeah,
And at this point, my son's mouths just dropped. Their jaws just
yeah,
dropped. Right. It was
yeah.
great. And I was so excited because it was so great to see it.
That's
What
what
was your
I was like
girlfriend doing?
"Ah!" And she was like and she was kinda like, "What?" And I was like, "Just
Yeah.
it's the
Just
twin
keep
brother."
watching. Just keep
I was like,
watching.
"Yeah."
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
immediately he's like, "Oh, you have a twin brother." And I love this because he goes, "Oh, it's so easy, it's so
Yeah.
simple." And he goes,
Yeah.
"No, no, 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 it's not
Yeah.
simple." He goes, there's nothing easy or simple about sharing a life.
And he
There's
says,
nothing."
that's the price of a good trick, Robert.
Yeah,
Sacrifice." Again, the good
yeah.
Borden talking about sacrifice.
Yeah, just like you never understood it. And then we see all this stuff of like we
Yeah.
watch it's such a great shot of like of him lining his hand up with his twin brother's
Yeah.
hand to cut the other twin's fingers
Oh,
off in the exact same spot. And you really realize like the
oh,
cost
man.
of what these guys
Yeah.
are what it's
Putting
taking
themselves
them,
through.
yeah,
Yeah.
to do
And
this. And
yeah,
yeah.
and he, it's good Borden who got shot first, and then it's
Mhm.
bad Borden. He cuts off, and when he cuts, so you just see him putting down. They put a what is that? I don't know.
It's like a
Something
chisel or
on it. A
something.
chisel, yeah.
Yeah.
And then he smacks it, and you just see um Christian Bale. He's got a piece of wood in between his mouth, and he just his scream is enough. You don't see him cut his fingers off. All you see is
Yeah.
him screaming,
But
and that's like, oh
we start seeing them switching places and changing
yeah,
makeup. There's all these
yep,
cool details in the movie too
yeah,
that, like, even when it's just the 2 of them hanging out in the shop, one of them
yeah,
is always dressed up as Fallon and one of them
yep,
isn't because they know if anybody walks in here at any time, we
yeah,
always need to be in character. And so
yeah,
they very rarely are, like, ever not in costume,
yeah,
but we see them changing the makeup. And what like, as soon as you see them putting on the Fallon makeup, you're like, "Duh, obviously
yeah.
that guy Fallon was a person wearing makeup." Like,
I know.
obviously.
I remember seeing it and going, "Oh my gosh, like, how did
This
I not see that?"
here's
Like, when
what's
I
so
first saw it.
here's what's so amazing about the end of this movie is anytime any magician explains to you how they do their trick, that's the reaction you have. You go,
You're like,
"Oh
"Oh
my
my
gosh,"
gosh." Like,
because it's always like the
yeah,
most obvious thing. It's
it is.
always like you're watching them do it and you'll go, "Do it again." And they'll do it again. And
Yeah.
you'll go, show me one more time." And then like you can't figure it out. And then you go, "Tell me how you do it." And they tell you what they're doing, and you're like, "Oh my gosh." Like
Like,
that's what
how
I
did I
thought like that's what I thought you might be doing, but I thought that was too easy. It's like,
Yeah, like, it's so easy, and you're just like, "Okay, that's what it is." And the movie was telling you the whole time.
yeah,
It told you the whole time, like, this is and you're just kinda feel stupid. And
yeah.
the first time I saw it, that was when I was like, "Oh my gosh, everything." Like, that was so brilliant. The I love yous made more
Mhm,
sense.
mhm,
Like, good Borden love, and this was really interesting, which I really noticed on this last rewatch. He says, he's telling him everything. He's like, I love Sarah, and it shows them,
mhm,
when they first meet, when
mhm.
good Borden and Sarah first meet, and he says he loved Olivia,
Yeah,
but then it shows Sarah and Bad Borden at the having dinner when they're
yeah,
mad at each other.
yeah,
And I was like, "Oh, wow." It didn't show him with Olivia.
yeah.
It showed him that he had contempt for Sarah.
Right,
Like, and it
right.
just kinda recontextualizes everything, but it's just, like, such a good the way that they unfold everything, and they just cut back to these quick moments that give you, like, he's coming out of the box, right? And he takes off his
Mhm.
mustache, and his brother's right there with him, and it's just, like, it's so
Yeah,
cool.
and then, but then like, he's like, "You never understood anything about sacrifice," and that's when Angier kinda tells him, like, "You have
Yeah.
no idea, like,
Yeah.
you have no idea what it took for me to
Yeah.
step into that machine every night, not knowing if I would be the man in the tank or the one in the audience.
Yep.
Like, you have no idea, like, I killed myself every night
Yeah.
for this trick." And so it is kind of like, at the final ending,
Yeah.
Angier's not just some hack, he's a guy who's like, "I went to great lengths
Yeah.
to
He
do." Yeah,
Yeah, he really did sacrifice as well. I mean, he was
yeah,
a and Borden tells him, "You did horrible things," and he
yeah,
did.
mhm,
But this is, like, really good acting by Hugh Jackman because he's like, "You really don't understand, do you?"
mhm,
He's like, "You don't understand why he did it." He said, "It's the look on their faces." He's
Yeah.
like, the world is cold. It's like
Uh-huh.
solid straight through, and he's like, but if you can make them believe just for a second,
Mhm.
he's like, that's what it's all about. And it's like, it really is pretty amazing that like
Yeah.
these guys both did horrible things.
Yeah.
Like they're both horrible. Even though
Yeah.
there's a good Borden, he
All
still did
in
a horrible thing.
totally.
Like,
And all in the service of just, like, this idea of making
yeah,
people believe in
yeah,
magic, making
yeah,
people believe and
yeah.
yeah, it's
And then he's like, look around, right? Look, and he's like, I don't care. Borden says, I don't care. Angier falls over. He hits over his lamp. Everything starts to burn, and then we hear, Borden starts walking out, and he's kind of looking around, and then we hear the same. There's three parts to every magic trick. There's the pledge, and he
Mhm.
kind of goes through that again,
Yeah,
and you see that he's telling this to Borden's daughter,
yeah,
and he says you have to make it come back. And
yeah,
at this point, we see that Borden comes back and he gets his daughter.
yeah,
He gets his daughter back. And this last time I watched it, when I watched it the first time, a few days ago when I watched it, I like totally cried in this part
yeah,
because it was like he gets his daughter back, and it is he did horrible things, but this is the character who's been the best of the three,
right,
and
and
he
and
gets his
Michael
daughter back.
Caine, Cutter understands that.
He
Cutter
does,
understands that, like, you know what, through all of this, I always saw that you were the better
yep,
magician, and I think Cutter just respects the
he
way
does,
that Borden went about doing the trick more than he respects what
yeah,
Angier did,
I agree,
and so he's happy to be like, yeah, you deserve to
yeah,
have
it's
your daughter back, and you
kind of
didn't
like a
deserve.
penance for what he did.
And also, yeah, Cutter's like, I also kind of made it so that your brother died, like,
Yeah,
and so,
yeah.
but it's a fantastic ending, and that's The Prestige,
Well,
and
wait, and then
yeah, sure.
and he says, he's like, but right now you're trying to piece everything together, but you don't really want to know the answer because you want to be fooled. And then we see that there's a floating Angier in one of these tanks, revealing that all of these tanks are full of just Angier. The first time, like, it's a
Yeah,
great way to end.
right, the first time that you watch it, you think he only put himself in the tank once, and then you realize
He
he
did
was
it
doing it every
over
night.
and over again,
Yeah,
and then it
yeah,
cuts to black, and then we got
uh-huh,
a great song. This
yeah,
song is really, really good,
yeah.
that ends the movie, but yeah, that's the end, that's The Prestige.
Okay, so we'll do a really quick scores because this episode's
Yeah, just
going long.
it
But
is.
I think that this is kind of easy for us. So
It is pretty
obviously, if
easy.
it's your first time watching our show, we do a technical rating for just like how well the movie is constructed at a technical level, with acting, with the score, with the musical score, with the writing, with editing, all that stuff. We do an ending. How well do they stick the landing? How good is the ending? We do a score for rewatchability. We do a score for cultural relevance, and we do our subjective score. So where are you at with technical rating for The Prestige?
10.
10 out of 10. Me
10 out
too.
of 10. Yep.
10 out of 10. I just was like, what am I going to fault it for? This
I
movie
know.
is
I know. What
just
can you
about as perfectly constructed as it can possibly be.
Yeah, and acted.
Yeah.
Everything is top notch. It's a 10 for sure.
Couldn't find a single thing I would criticize it for. The
Nope.
ending,
10.
10 out of 10.
It's so good. It's
One
such
of
a
the
good.
best endings ever.
Yes,
And we decided to do this because we liked the ending so much of
we did.
Presence that we did last week. We
Yes.
talked about like these great endings that kind of recontextualize the
Yeah.
whole movie. And this is one of those endings that makes the next score so easy, which is rewatchability, because rewatchability, 10 out of 10 for this movie.
10, yeah. I
10
mean,
out
I
of
could
10.
rewatch it. I rewatched it so many times, and I love you get something every time you rewatch it. I love it.
Yep, it's so well constructed and it's so detailed in its construction that there is something new I learn every single time I watch
Yep.
this movie, and I'm excited for the rewatch every single
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
It's one of the most rewatchable
Oh, yeah.
twist ending movies I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Uh, Now this is the only score where we might not have 10 out of 10, which is our
Yeah.
cultural significance of this film, cultural
Yes.
impact. And again, it's like, I just think that the movie doesn't get talked about enough as
Yeah.
like a great example of great twist endings. I don't think it gets talked about enough as one of the best Nolan films.
Yeah.
So I put it at a 7 because I don't
Okay.
think it, but what, I don't know. What,
I put it at an 8.
yeah,
The reason being that I agree with you with everything, but once people do see it,
right.
they realize how good it is, and
Yeah.
they realize what they've been missing on. And
Mhm.
usually when people see it, they realize this is one of Nolan's best.
Yeah.
So it is, yeah, I think 7 is a good score. I give it an 8 because because of that fact that every time people see it, they love it.
Fair. And subjective score, I imagine we're both
10.
10. 10.
Amazing.
10. Just what's not to like
I know.
about The Prestige? Wow, what a great movie.
Great movie.
Yep. So that's it. Have you seen The Prestige? Tell us your thoughts. And, as always, like, share, comment, subscribe. Thanks
Yep.
for being here. And let us know what movies you want us to do in the comments. Tell
Yeah.
us what you want to see. And we'll get back to you. So
Yeah.
thanks, and we'll see you on the next one, right?
Yep. We'll see you next time.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.